Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little different. A time before cities, before farms, before the first written word was ever scratched into clay. We're going back 200,000 years to when humanity was still raw, still figuring out what it meant to be human. No hospitals, no grocery stores, no roofs over our heads, just you, the wilderness, and a sky full of stars you couldn't name yet. You might think survival back then was simpler. No bills to pay, no emails to answer, no alarm clocks jarring you awake at 6 in the morning. But here's the truth, and it's not comforting. You probably wouldn't last a week, maybe not even a day. Because the world our ancestors lived in wasn't just different, it was brutal, unforgiving, and designed to kill anything that hesitated, anything that made a single mistake. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see who's drifting off with me from across the world. Maybe you're in bed after a long day. Maybe you're struggling to quiet your mind. Either way, you're here, and I'm glad. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get comfortable, because tonight we're stepping into the shoes, or lack thereof, of early Homo sapiens. And trust me, it's going to be uncomfortable. Congratulations! You've just woken up 200,000 years ago. The good news is you're alive. The bad news is everything else. Your bed is the ground, not soft grass or a pile of leaves you carefully arranged, just dirt. Hard, cold, uneven dirt. Maybe a few animal hides if your group managed to hunt something recently and didn't need every scrap for clothing. But those hides are stiff, unwashed, and probably hosting a small ecosystem of insects that are now hosting you. There's no mattress, no pillow, no blanket that smells like lavender detergent. Just the earth beneath you and the sky above, assuming you can even see the sky through the smoke of a dying fire, if your group has fire at all. Not every early human community had mastered it yet. Some were still living in darkness, huddling together for warmth, praying to forces they didn't understand that the night wouldn't take them. You blink awake, and the first thing you notice is the cold. It's always cold in the mornings, even in Africa where Homo sapiens first emerged. The temperature drops at night on the open savanna, and your body, which is essentially naked except for a few scraps of hide tied with sinew, offers no protection. You're shivering before you're fully conscious. The second thing you notice is the silence. Not peaceful silence, threatening silence. No birds yet, no rustling of small animals. Just wind, and somewhere far off, the low rumble of something large moving through the brush. Your brain, still wired with the same fear responses we have today, immediately floods your system with adrenaline. You don't know what that sound is. You just know it could kill you. Is less than #0. 5 hash is greater than. You sit up slowly, every muscle protesting. Your back aches from sleeping on stone and root. Your neck is stiff. Your skin itches everywhere. Little bites from bugs you couldn't see in the dark. Bugs that have been feeding on you all night. You scratch, and your nails come away with dirt, dried blood, and something you'd rather not identify. Around you, other members of your group are beginning to stir. There are maybe 15 or 20 of you, all related by blood or necessity. You don't have names for each other. Not really. Language as we know it doesn't exist yet. You have sounds, grunts, gestures. You point and growl and hope the others understand. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Miscommunication can mean death. No one greets you with a smile. No one asks how you slept. There's no small talk because there's no talk at all. Just the business of surviving another day. Someone is already checking the fire, trying to coax life back into the embers with dry grass and breath. If the fire is out, the group will panic. Fire is safety. Fire is warmth. Fire is the thing that keeps the night predators at a distance. You stand, and your joints crack like old wood. You're maybe 20 years old, but your body feels ancient. Every day is a marathon. Every meal is uncertain. Your teeth are already worn down from chewing tough meat and gritty roots. Your feet are calloused and scarred from walking barefoot over sharp rocks and thorns. You've never worn shoes. Shoes don't exist. The air smells like smoke, sweat, and earth. There's no soap, no deodorant, no concept of hygiene beyond staying alive. You smell like the ground you slept on. Everyone does. It's not offensive because it's normal. It's just the smell of being human. You look around at your surroundings. There's no village, no huts, no structures. Your group sleeps in the open or under rock overhangs if you're lucky enough to find one. Everything you own, every tool, every scrap of hide, every sharpened stick is carried with you. You're nomadic because you have to be. Food doesn't stay in one place. Water doesn't stay in one place. Safety doesn't stay in one place. The sun is just starting to rise, painting the horizon in shades of orange and red. It's beautiful, objectively, but you don't have time to appreciate it. Beauty is a luxury. Right now, you need to figure out where your next meal is coming from, where the nearest water source is, and whether that rustling in the bushes is something you can eat or something that wants to eat you. Your stomach is already growling. You haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon, and even then it was just a handful of berries and a small piece of scavenged meat that tasted like rot. Hunger is your constant companion. Not the kind of hunger that makes you cranky before lunch. The kind that gnaws at your insides, makes you weak, makes your thoughts slow and desperate. Someone in the group makes a sound, a sharp grunt. It means move. It means we're not safe here. It means predators or rival groups might be near. You don't argue. You don't ask questions. You just follow, because staying with the group is the only chance you have. And as you take your first steps into the Paleolithic morning, barefoot and half-starved, one thing becomes painfully clear. This isn't an adventure, this is survival, and the odds are not in your favor. So you've made it through your first night, 200,000 years ago? Barely. Your eyes are open, your heart is pounding, and your body is screaming at you that something is very, very wrong, because there is no bed. There is no bedroom. There is no home. There's just you, the ground, and the creeping realization that you've woken up in a world that doesn't care if you live or die. Let's start with where you slept. Actually, let's be honest. You didn't really sleep, not the way you're used to. Modern humans cycle through stages of sleep, drifting from light to deep to REM sleep in roughly 90-minute intervals. Your brain needs this. Your body repairs itself during deep sleep. Your memories consolidate during REM. But 200,000 years ago, that luxury didn't exist. Not fully, not safely. Early Homo sapiens didn't sleep in long, uninterrupted stretches. They couldn't. Predators don't take nights off. Rival groups don't respect your rest schedule. The environment doesn't pause its dangers just because you're tired. So instead, Our ancestors likely practiced what researchers call segmented sleep or polyphasic sleep, short bursts, light dozing. One eye open, metaphorically speaking, though sometimes literally. Imagine trying to fall asleep, knowing that a cave lion could be circling your camp, that hyenas are attracted to the smell of the meat your group managed to scavenge earlier, that a simple thunderstorm could drench you, drop your body temperature, and kill you by morning. Your nervous system, even back then, was wired to keep you alert. The amygdala, that almond-shaped part of your brain responsible for processing fear, was working overtime every single night. You probably slept in shifts with your group. Someone always watching, someone always listening. Because the moment everyone fell into deep sleep was the moment something with teeth and claws could wander into camp and pick off the weakest member. And that weakest member could easily be you. Your bed, if you can call it that, was the ground, not grass. Grass doesn't grow everywhere, and even when it does, it's often too short, too dry, or too full of biting insects to offer any comfort. You slept on dirt, on rock, on sand, on whatever surface your group happened to stop at when exhaustion finally overtook the will to keep moving. If you were lucky, someone in your group had recently killed an animal, maybe a young antelope, maybe something smaller, like a hare or a bird. The hide could be scraped clean, though not well, and laid beneath you. But animal hides weren't soft. They were stiff, rough, and they carried the smell of death and decay because there was no tanning process yet, no salt curing, no preservation techniques. The hide was just skin, drying in the sun, covered in flies. And those hides weren't just your mattress, they were also your blanket, your clothing, and sometimes your shelter. Everything had to serve multiple purposes because resources were scarce, and carrying too much meant moving slowly, which meant becoming prey. Let's talk about the cold. Even in Africa, where our species first emerged, temperatures drop at night. The savannas and grasslands that early humans roamed could swing from blistering heat during the day to near freezing once the sun set. You had no walls to block the wind, no insulation, no thermostat to adjust. Your body tried to compensate. Shivering is an involuntary response, your muscles contracting rapidly to generate heat. But shivering burns calories, and calories were the one thing you couldn't afford to waste. Every shiver was energy you'd need tomorrow to walk, to hunt, to run from danger. So you huddled, close to the others, close to the fire, if there was one, skin to skin, breath to breath, because body heat was the only heat you had. But huddling came with its own problems. Lice, fleas, mites, skin infections. When you press unwashed bodies together night after night, parasites migrate. They jump from host to host, biting, feeding, laying eggs in hair and skin folds. You'd wake up itching, scratching until you bled. And those scratches, in a world without antiseptics or antibiotics, could become infected. A small bite could become an abscess. An abscess could become sepsis. Sepsis could become death. There were no pillows. Your head rested on your arm, on a bundled piece of hide, or on a rock if you were too exhausted to care. Your neck would stiffen, your shoulders would ache. You'd wake with headaches, with muscle cramps, with joints that felt like they'd rusted overnight, and you were young. Imagine being 30, which in Paleolithic terms was elderly. Your body was already breaking down. The ground itself was a hazard. Scorpions hid under rocks. Snakes sought warmth near sleeping bodies. Spiders, some venomous, crawled over skin in the dark. You couldn't see them, you couldn't feel them until they bit. And by then, it was too late. A venomous bite without medical intervention meant swelling, fever, necrosis. It meant hoping your immune system could fight it off while you lay immobilized, a burden to the group. And then there was the smoke. If your group had fire, and that's a big if because not all early human communities had mastered fire-making yet, you slept close to it for warmth and safety. But Paleolithic fires weren't clean burning. There were no chimneys, no ventilation. The smoke from burning wood, dried dung, and animal fat filled the air. You breathed it in all night. Your lungs, over months and years, would blacken. Some researchers believe early humans may have developed larger nasal passages partly as an adaptation to filter smoke and dust. But that didn't make it comfortable. It just made it survivable. Barely. Let's not forget the sounds. At night, the savannah came alive, not with crickets and gentle breezes, but with roars, with howls, with the screams of animals being torn apart by predators, with the crackle of your dying fire, with the breathing of the person next to you, labored and uneven because they were sick or injured or simply exhausted beyond measure. Your ears stayed alert even in sleep. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of grass, every distant growl pulled you back toward wakefulness. This wasn't paranoia. This was survival. The humans who slept too deeply, who ignored the warning signs, who let their guard down completely, those humans didn't pass on their genes. You are descended from the light sleepers, the anxious ones, the ones whose brains refused to fully shut down because shutting down meant death. And when you finally did drift into something resembling rest, your dreams were different, not abstract, not symbolic. They were visceral, primal. You dreamed of running, of being chased, of hunger, of thirst, of falling. Because those were the things your brain needed to rehearse. Those were the scenarios that could kill you tomorrow. Modern sleep studies show that REM sleep, the stage where we dream most vividly, helps process emotions and consolidate memories. But for early humans, dreams may have served a more immediate function. They were simulations, practice runs, your brain working through threats while your body rested, preparing you to react faster, to survive longer. There was no such thing as a good night's sleep. There was only the sleep you managed to get before something woke you, before the fire went out, before someone in the group shouted a warning, before your bladder forced you to move away from the safety of the group and relieve yourself in the dark, exposed and vulnerable. You'd wake with the sun, not because you were rested, but because staying still any longer meant wasting daylight, and daylight was the only time you had any advantage, the only time you could see threats before they saw you, the only time you could search for food and water with any real chance of success. So you'd rise, stiff and sore, covered in bites and dirt, your eyes burning from smoke, your stomach empty and screaming. You'd look around at the others, and you'd see the same exhaustion in their faces, the same hollowness, the same grim understanding that today would be just as hard as yesterday, maybe harder. This was morning in the Paleolithic. No coffee, no shower, no moment of peace before the chaos began. Just the immediate, relentless pressure to survive. And it started the moment your eyes opened. You've survived the night. You've woken up stiff, cold, and covered in insect bites. And now, nature is calling, loudly, urgently. And here's where things get deeply, uncomfortably real, because in the Paleolithic there was no bathroom, no toilet paper, no privacy. no dignity. Just you, your body, and the wilderness that doesn't care about your comfort. Let's start with the obvious. You need to relieve yourself. This is a basic biological function. Your kidneys have been filtering waste all night, producing urine that's now putting pressure on your bladder. Your intestines have been processing whatever you managed to eat yesterday, and your colon is signaling that it's time to evacuate. In the modern world, you'd walk to a bathroom, close a door, and handle this in private. 200,000 years ago, you walk away from the group, squat behind a bush if you're lucky enough to find one, and hope nothing decides you look like an easy meal while you're vulnerable. Privacy didn't exist. Not really. Your group was small, maybe 15 to 30 individuals, and you all lived in each other's sightlines constantly. Everyone knew when you needed to go. Everyone could hear it. Modesty wasn't a luxury early humans could afford. Survival meant staying close to the group, and that meant bodily functions were just part of the communal experience. But let's talk about what happens after. In our world, you flush, the waste disappears into a complex sewage system, treated and processed far away from your daily life. In the Paleolithic, it stayed right there, on the ground, attracting flies, spreading parasites, creating breeding grounds for disease. Human waste is a biological hazard. Feces contain bacteria, viruses, and parasite eggs. E. coli, Salmonella, Giardia, tapeworms, roundworms, the list goes on. When waste isn't properly disposed of, these pathogens contaminate the soil. They seep into water sources. They stick to your hands, your feet, your food, and without soap, without any understanding of germ theory, you had no way to break the cycle. Early humans didn't know that invisible microorganisms were making them sick. They didn't know that the cramping in their stomach or the bloody diarrhea that left them weak and dehydrated was caused by parasites they'd ingested from contaminated water or unwashed hands. They just knew that sometimes people got sick and sometimes people died, and there wasn't much anyone could do about it. Let's talk about wiping, or rather, the lack thereof. Toilet paper is a modern invention, a very modern invention. Before that, humans used whatever was available. Leaves, if they were soft enough and not poisonous. Grass, though that could be rough and ineffective. Moss, which was slightly better but not always accessible. Smooth stones. Sticks, sometimes just their hands, followed by wiping those hands on their clothing or in dirt. Now imagine this. You've just used your hand to clean yourself. There's no running water nearby. No soap. Maybe you rub your hand in some dirt or sand, trying to scrape off the worst of it. Then you go back to your group. You share food. You touch tools. You help prepare a kill. Your hands all over the meat that everyone will eat. This is how disease spread. This is why parasitic infections were nearly universal. Studies of ancient human remains show that intestinal parasites were incredibly common. Roundworms, hookworms, whipworms. These weren't occasional problems, they were constant companions. Parasites live in the intestines, feeding on the nutrients you consume, laying thousands of eggs that pass out in feces. Eggs that then contaminate the environment and infect the next host. It's a cycle that never ends without intervention. And parasites do more than just make you uncomfortable. They cause malnutrition. They trigger immune responses that leave you chronically inflamed and exhausted. Heavy worm burdens, especially in children, can stunt growth, impair cognitive development, and cause anemia. Anemia means less oxygen reaches your muscles and brain. You're weaker, slower, less able to hunt, to run, to think clearly. In a world where every advantage matters, parasites could mean the difference between life and death. Then there's the issue of menstruation. Roughly half of early humans experienced it, and there were no pads, no tampons, no menstrual cups, just blood. For 3 to 7 days, every month, from roughly age 12 or 13 until menopause in the mid to late 40s, assuming you lived that long. Some anthropologists believe early human women may have experienced fewer periods than modern women. Why? Because they were often pregnant or breastfeeding. Breastfeeding suppresses ovulation, a natural form of birth control. If a woman gave birth and nursed for several years, which was common, her periods might not resume until the child was weaned. But this wasn't universal, and many women still menstruated regularly. How did they manage it? Probably with absorbent materials, soft animal hides, moss, grass, layers of cloth. If the group had developed basic weaving, but these materials had to be secured somehow, likely tucked into a wrap or held in place with cordage, and they had to be changed. And cleaned, if possible, though cleaning wasn't always practical. Blood attracts predators. The scent carries. A menstruating woman was not just uncomfortable. She was a potential liability to the group's safety. And let's not ignore the cramps. Menstrual cramps are caused by uterine contractions, the same contractions that happen during childbirth but on a smaller scale. The uterus is shedding its lining, and prostaglandins, hormone-like chemicals, trigger muscle contractions to expel the tissue. For some women, this is mildly uncomfortable. For others, it's debilitating. Pain that radiates to the lower back and thighs, nausea, fatigue, headaches. There were no pain relievers, no ibuprofen, no heating pads. Maybe someone in the group knew of a plant that could help, something with mild anti-inflammatory properties, but those remedies were hit or miss. Most women just endured it. They kept walking, kept working, kept gathering food and caring for children because stopping wasn't an option. Now, let's talk about something we don't often consider: urinary tract infections. UTIs are caused by bacteria, usually E. coli, entering the urethra and traveling up into the bladder. Women are particularly susceptible because their urethras are shorter, giving bacteria an easier path, and in a world without hygiene, without clean water, without any way to properly clean the genital area, UTIs were common. A UTI starts as a burning sensation when you urinate. Then comes the constant urge to go, even when your bladder is empty. Then pain in your lower abdomen. If left untreated, the infection can spread to the kidneys, causing fever, back pain, and potentially kidney failure. Without antibiotics, a severe kidney infection could kill you. But it gets worse. Childbirth, which we'll talk about more later, often caused tearing and damage to the pelvic floor. Fistulas, abnormal connections between the bladder or rectum and the vagina, could form after traumatic births. These cause chronic leaking of urine or feces, infections, and social isolation. There was no surgical repair. Women just lived with it, in constant discomfort, until infection or another complication ended their lives. Dehydration also made everything worse. When you're not drinking enough water, and remember, clean water was hard to find, your urine becomes concentrated, dark, acidic. It burns. It increases the risk of kidney stones, small, hard deposits of minerals that form in the kidneys and have to pass through the urinary tract. If you've ever had a kidney stone, you know the pain is excruciating. Imagine experiencing that without understanding what's happening, without pain medication, without any hope of medical intervention. Bowel issues were constant. diarrhea from contaminated water or spoiled food, constipation from a diet low in fiber or dehydration, hemorrhoids from straining, from squatting repeatedly, from the sheer physical stress of daily life. Hemorrhoids are swollen blood vessels in the rectal area, and they can bleed, itch, and cause significant pain. Again, no treatment, no relief, just suffering. And all of this, every humiliating, painful, degrading aspect of bodily function happened in full view of your community. You couldn't hide illness. You couldn't mask discomfort. If you were weak, if you were sick, everyone knew. And while the group might support you for a time, there was a limit. Resources were scarce. If you couldn't contribute, if you became a burden, the group might leave you behind, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. So yes, you survived the morning. You handled your body's needs as best you could in a world that offered no comfort, no cleanliness, and no second chances. But the day is just beginning, and your body, already compromised, already hosting parasites and fighting infections you don't even know you have, is about to face its next trial. Hunger. You've made it through the bathroom ordeal, such as it was. Now your stomach is growling, not the polite kind of hunger that makes you check the time and think about lunch, the deep, gnawing kind that makes your hands shake and your head swim, the kind that tells you if you don't eat soon, your body will start consuming itself. Welcome to breakfast in the Paleolithic, where every meal is a gamble and starvation is always one bad day away. Let's be clear about something. There is no breakfast waiting for you. No bowl of cereal, no toast, no fruit smoothie, no anything. Food doesn't appear because you want it. It appears only if you find it, catch it, or scavenge it before something else does. And finding food in the Paleolithic required knowledge, skill, endurance, and an enormous amount of luck. Your body is already in trouble. You haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon, and even that was just a few handfuls of berries and a scrap of meat so small it barely registered. That means you've gone roughly 16 to 18 hours without food. Your blood sugar is dropping. Glucose, the simple sugar your brain relies on for fuel, is running low, and when your brain doesn't get enough glucose, it starts to falter. Your thoughts slow down. Your reaction time increases. You become irritable, confused, and weak. This isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. In a world where a split-second decision can mean the difference between catching prey and becoming prey, a foggy mind is a death sentence. Your body tries to compensate by breaking down stored fat and muscle tissue, converting it into energy through a process called gluconeogenesis. But that process is slow. It can't keep up with the demands of constant physical activity. So you stay hungry, and the hunger gets worse. Now you need to find food. But where? Early humans were hunter-gatherers, which sounds almost romantic until you realize what it actually means. Gathering meant walking for miles, scanning the landscape for edible plants. Hunting meant tracking animals for hours or days, often unsuccessfully. And both required intimate knowledge of your environment, knowledge that took years to acquire and could still get you killed if you made a single mistake. Let's start with plants. Foraging was probably the primary source of calories for early humans, but not all plants are edible. In fact, many are toxic. Berries that look plump and delicious might contain alkaloids that cause vomiting, seizures, or cardiac arrest. Roots that seem harmless might be laced with cyanogenic glycosides, compounds that release cyanide when digested. Leaves that look like food might trigger severe allergic reactions or liver failure. How do you know which plants are safe? You learn from your elders, from watching animals, from trial and error, though error often meant sickness or death. Early humans likely developed a kind of oral tradition, passing down knowledge about which plants to eat, which to avoid, and which to use for medicine. But if you were separated from your group, or if your group entered unfamiliar territory, that knowledge became useless. Even when you found safe plants, they weren't always nutritious. Wild tubers and roots were often small, fibrous, and tough. They required extensive chewing, which wore down your teeth over time. Wild fruits were smaller and more sour than the domesticated varieties we enjoy today. They provided some sugar, some vitamins, but not much in the way of calories or protein. You could eat all day and still feel hungry. And then there's the problem of competition. You weren't the only one looking for food. Other humans, other groups, were scouring the same landscape. Baboons, chimpanzees, and other primates competed for the same fruits and nuts. Even insects, especially ants and termites, which early humans probably ate for protein, were contested resources. Everything edible was already claimed by something else. So you turn to meat, protein, fat, the concentrated calories that could sustain you through days of travel and hard labor. But hunting is not easy. It's not instinctive. It's learned, practiced, and incredibly dangerous. Early humans didn't have claws or fangs. They weren't fast. They weren't particularly strong compared to the animals they hunted. What they had was intelligence, cooperation, and endurance. Persistence hunting was one method. You'd track an animal, often an antelope or a deer, for hours in the midday heat. You'd chase it, not at full speed, but at a steady jog. The animal would sprint away, but then stop to cool down. You'd catch up. It would run again, you'd follow. Again and again, for miles, sometimes 10 or 15 or more, until the animal collapsed from heat exhaustion. Humans are among the best endurance runners in the animal kingdom. We can sweat to cool ourselves. Most animals can't. They overheat. And when they overheat, they die. But persistence hunting required energy you didn't have. It required water you couldn't guarantee. It required a group working together, communicating, coordinating, and even then, the animal might escape. It might lead you into dangerous territory. It might attract the attention of a predator that decided you looked easier to catch than the prey you were chasing. Another option was scavenging. Large predators, lions, hyenas, leopards, made kills regularly. If you could find a fresh carcass and drive the predators away with fire, noise, or sheer numbers, you could claim the leftovers. But this was risky. Predators don't give up food easily. They're stronger, faster, and more aggressive than you. And even if you succeeded in scaring them off, the meat was often partially eaten, crawling with flies, and beginning to rot. Carrion. Rotting meat is dangerous. As flesh decays, bacteria multiply. Clostridium, Salmonella, E. coli. These pathogens thrive in dead tissue. Eating spoiled meat can cause food poisoning, severe diarrhea, vomiting, and dehydration. In a world without medical care, food poisoning could kill you. But hunger is a powerful motivator. When the alternative is starvation, you eat what you can find and hope your immune system can handle it. Even when you manage to kill or scavenge an animal, butchering it was a challenge. You had basic tools, sharp stones, maybe a hand axe. You'd hack at the carcass, tearing through hide and muscle, your hands covered in blood and fat. You'd work quickly, Because the smell attracted predators. Every minute spent butchering was a minute you were exposed, vulnerable. And you couldn't take the whole animal. It was too heavy. So you'd cut away the choicest parts, the organs, the fat, the muscle, and leave the rest. Organs were prized. The liver, rich in vitamins A and D, the brain, high in fat and omega-3 fatty acids, the bone marrow, which could be cracked open and scooped out, pure concentrated energy. These weren't delicacies, they were survival. Fat was especially critical. Lean meat alone can't sustain you. Your body needs fat to process protein, to stay warm, to maintain cell membranes. Without fat, you can experience protein poisoning, also called rabbit starvation, where you eat constantly but still waste away. And here's something we rarely think about. Eating raw meat, cooking over fire, while practiced by some groups, wasn't universal yet. Some early humans ate their meat raw. Raw meat is tougher, harder to chew, harder to digest. It also carries parasites. Tapeworms, trichinosis, toxoplasmosis, all of these can be transmitted through undercooked or raw flesh. Once inside your body, parasites compete with you for nutrients, reproduce, and spread. Some cause mild symptoms, others cause organ damage, neurological problems, or death. But you ate anyway, because the alternative was starving. Your stomach cramped around the tough, gristly meat. You chewed until your jaw ached. You swallowed chunks that felt like stones going down, and maybe, just maybe, you felt a brief moment of relief. The gnawing hunger eased. Your blood sugar stabilized. Your body stopped cannibalizing itself, at least for a few hours. But that relief was temporary. The meal you just ate might last you until evening, maybe until tomorrow morning if you were lucky. But then the cycle would start again. The hunger, the search, the risk, the exhaustion. There were no 3 meals a day, no snacks, no refrigerators stocked with leftovers. Food was scarce, unpredictable, and never guaranteed. Malnutrition was chronic. Even when you ate, you weren't getting all the nutrients your body needed. Vitamin C deficiency led to scurvy, bleeding gums, loose teeth, weakness. Vitamin D deficiency, especially in regions with less sunlight, caused rickets, bone deformities, muscle pain. Iron deficiency led to anemia. Calcium deficiency weakened bones and teeth. You were always operating at a deficit, your body struggling to function on incomplete fuel. Children suffered the most. Growing bodies need consistent nutrition. When food was scarce, growth slowed or stopped entirely. Stunting, both physical and cognitive, was common. Kids who survived infancy often grew into adults who were shorter, weaker, and less capable than they could have been. But survival was survival. Being small and alive was better than being well-fed and dead. And let's not forget the psychological toll. Modern humans living in food-secure environments can't fully comprehend what it's like to be genuinely hungry day after day, to go to sleep hungry, to wake up hungry, to spend every waking moment thinking about food, searching for food, dreaming about food. Hunger rewires your brain. It makes you obsessive, desperate, willing to take risks you'd normally avoid. This is what every day looked like. A relentless search for calories, punctuated by brief moments of relief when you found something, anything, to eat. And even then, you knew tomorrow would bring the same struggle, the same uncertainty, the same gnawing fear that this time you might not find enough, that this time your luck might run out. So yes, you ate, barely, And now, with your stomach partially filled and your body momentarily sated, it's time to face the next challenge: water. Because hunger might weaken you, but thirst will kill you even faster. You've found something to eat. Your stomach has stopped screaming, at least for now. But there's another need rising, one even more urgent than hunger: thirst. Your mouth is dry, your lips are cracked, your tongue feels thick and heavy. You need water. Not in an hour, not later, now. Because while you can survive weeks without food, you'll be dead in 3 to 5 days without water. And in the Paleolithic, clean water was one of the hardest things to find. Let's talk about what's happening inside your body right now. Water makes up roughly 60% of your total body weight. It's in your blood, your cells, your tissues, even your bones. Every single biological process depends on it. Your kidneys use water to filter waste. Your blood uses water to carry oxygen and nutrients. Your brain, which is about 73% water, needs it to function. Even a 2% drop in hydration affects your cognitive performance. You get confused. Your reaction time slows. You make mistakes. Right now, you're already dehydrated. You've been sweating. You've been breathing. You've been urinating, assuming you had enough water in your system to produce urine. Every breath you take releases moisture. Every drop of sweat that evaporates from your skin takes water with it, and you haven't replaced any of it since yesterday, maybe longer. Dehydration triggers a cascade of problems. First, your blood volume decreases. Less blood means your heart has to work harder to pump oxygen to your muscles and brain. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure drops, you feel dizzy, weak, lightheaded. Then your body starts prioritizing. It pulls water from less critical areas to keep your vital organs functioning. Your skin loses elasticity. Your eyes sink slightly into their sockets. Your urine, if you're still producing any, turns dark and concentrated, a sign your kidneys are desperately trying to conserve every drop. If dehydration continues, you start to experience heat exhaustion. Your body can't regulate its temperature properly without water for sweating. Core temperature rises. You feel nauseous. You might vomit, which only makes dehydration worse. Eventually, you collapse. Your organs begin to shut down. First your kidneys, then your liver, then your heart. Death from dehydration is slow, agonizing, and preventable if you can just find water. So you search. You look for signs. Animal tracks leading in a consistent direction, because animals need water too and they know where to find it. Birds circling overhead, especially in the morning or evening, often near water sources. The sound of running water, though in the open savanna, rivers and streams are rare and seasonal. When you finally find water, your first instinct is to drink, to plunge your face into the stream or pool and gulp as much as you can. But here's the problem. That water, no matter how clear it looks, is contaminated. Guaranteed. Let me explain why. Waterborne pathogens are invisible. You can't see bacteria, you can't see parasites, you can't see viruses, but they're there, thriving in every natural water source. Animals drink from these streams, they urinate in them, they defecate near them. When it rains, waste gets washed into the water. Decaying plant matter and dead animals rot in stagnant pools, releasing toxins and creating perfect breeding grounds for microorganisms. Let's start with bacteria. E. coli, a bacterium that lives in the intestines of animals and humans, is everywhere. Most strains are harmless, but some, like E. coli 0157, produce toxins that cause severe diarrhea, cramping, and sometimes kidney failure. Cholera, caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae, turns your intestines into a waterfall. You lose liters of fluid in hours, dying from dehydration even though you just drank water. Then there are parasites. Giardia lamblia is a protozoan that lives in contaminated water. When you ingest it, it attaches to the lining of your small intestine and feeds off your nutrients. Symptoms include explosive diarrhea, gas, bloating, nausea, and severe abdominal cramps. It's nicknamed beaver fever because beavers are common carriers, but any animal can spread it, and it's persistent. Without treatment, Giardia infections can last weeks or months, slowly starving you. Cryptosporidium is another waterborne parasite. It forms hard, protective cysts that are resistant to almost everything. Even modern water treatment struggles to eliminate it. Once inside your body, it causes cryptosporidiosis, profuse watery diarrhea, dehydration, weight loss, and fever. For someone already malnourished and weakened, it's often fatal. And let's not forget worms, flatworms, roundworms, tapeworms. All of them have aquatic stages in their life cycles. Some are ingested directly when you drink, others enter through your skin if you wade into the water. Schistosomes, tiny parasitic flatworms, burrow through your skin, travel through your bloodstream, and settle in your intestines or bladder, where they lay eggs. The eggs trigger chronic inflammation, organ damage, and blood in your urine or stool. This condition, schistosomiasis, affects hundreds of millions of people even today in areas without clean water. Guinea worms are especially horrific. You drink water contaminated with tiny crustaceans called copepods. Inside those copepods are guinea worm larvae. Your stomach acid digests the copepods, but not the larvae. The larvae burrow into your intestinal wall, mature, and mate. The females, now up to a meter long, migrate through your body. A year later, they create a blister on your skin, usually on your leg or foot. When you step into water to cool the burning pain, the worm emerges through the blister and releases thousands of larvae into the water, starting the cycle again. Extracting the worm requires winding it around a stick, slowly, over days or weeks. If it breaks, the rotting remnants inside your body cause severe infections. But you don't know any of this. You don't know about bacteria or parasites or life cycles. You just know you're thirsty. So you drink. You scoop water with your hands or lower your face directly into the stream. It's cool. It's refreshing. For a moment, the relief is overwhelming. Your body soaks it up. Your cells rehydrate. Your blood volume increases. You feel human again. And then, hours or days later, the sickness begins. It starts with a stomachache, mild at first. Then it intensifies. Cramping that doubles you over, nausea that comes in waves, and then the diarrhea, sudden, violent, uncontrollable. You're losing more water now than you took in. You're dehydrating again, faster this time, because your body is desperately trying to flush out the infection. Diarrheal diseases were one of the leading causes of death in pre-modern humans. They still are in parts of the world without access to clean water. Your body can only handle so much fluid loss. Severe diarrhea causes electrolyte imbalances. Sodium, potassium, chloride. These ions are critical for muscle function, nerve signals, and heart rhythm. When they drop too low, your muscles cramp, your heart beats irregularly, you become confused, lethargic, and eventually unconscious. Children and the elderly were especially vulnerable. Their bodies couldn't tolerate dehydration as well as healthy adults. A child with severe diarrhea could die in a day. An elderly person weakened by age and malnutrition might last too. Even if you survived, repeated infections damaged your intestines, reduced your ability to absorb nutrients, and left you chronically weak. And here's the cruel irony. To recover from diarrhea, you need water. But the only water available is the same contaminated source that made you sick in the first place. So you drink again. You get sick again. The cycle continues until either your immune system adapts, which takes weeks or months, or you die. Stagnant water was even worse. Pools that didn't flow, that sat under the sun, became breeding grounds for mosquitoes. Mosquitoes carry malaria, a parasitic disease that infects red blood cells. Malaria causes fever, chills, sweating, headaches, and fatigue. In severe cases, it leads to organ failure, coma, and death. Early humans in Africa, where malaria was endemic, developed some genetic resistance over thousands of generations. But that resistance wasn't complete. People still got sick. People still died. Some groups may have learned to recognize cleaner water sources. Fast-moving streams were safer than stagnant pools. Water that bubbled up from underground springs was often less contaminated, but even then, there were no guarantees. And during dry seasons, when rivers shrank to trickles or disappeared entirely, you drank whatever you could find. Dehydration affects your brain in strange ways. You start hallucinating. You see water where there isn't any, a phenomenon called a mirage. Your desperate mind creates illusions of relief that don't exist. You stumble toward them, wasting precious energy. And when you realize they're not real, the psychological blow is almost as devastating as the physical thirst. Some early humans may have tried to store water, hollowed gourds, animal bladders, anything that could hold liquid. But storage came with its own problems. Water sitting in a container grows algae, attracts insects, and becomes a breeding ground for bacteria. Without the ability to seal or sterilize containers, stored water was often just as dangerous as drinking from a contaminated source. And let's talk about the sheer effort required to find water. In wet seasons, it was easier. Rain filled rivers, created temporary pools, soaked the ground, but in dry seasons, which could last months, water sources dried up. Your group had to move, constantly, following ancient migration routes passed down through generations. You walked 10, 15, 20 kilometers a day, searching. And if you didn't find water, you died. Simple as that. Thirst is one of the most powerful biological drives. It overrides almost everything else. Hungry? You can wait. Tired? You can push through. But thirsty? Your body demands immediate action. And when you're dehydrated, your decision-making suffers. You take risks you shouldn't. You drink from sources you'd normally avoid. Because your brain? So you found water. You drank it. And now, whether you know it or not, you're carrying the consequences inside you. Parasites beginning their life cycles, bacteria multiplying in your gut, toxins seeping into your bloodstream. And all you can do is hope your body is strong enough to fight it off. Because if it's not, the very thing that kept you alive today will be the thing that kills you tomorrow. You've found water. You've drunk from it, consequences and all. Your thirst is momentarily satisfied. But now the sun is setting, and that brings a whole new kind of terror. Because in the Paleolithic, nighttime didn't just mean darkness. It meant you were no longer the hunter, you were the prey. And the things that hunted you were faster, stronger, and better equipped to kill than you could ever be. Let's be absolutely clear about something. Early humans were not apex predators, not even close. You weren't at the top of the food chain. You were somewhere in the middle, competing with hyenas and leopards for scraps, avoiding lions and saber-toothed cats at all costs. The idea that humans have always been dominant is a comfortable modern myth. 200,000 years ago, you were prey, and your body knew it. Your brain is hardwired with fear responses that evolved specifically to keep you alive in a world full of predators. The amygdala, that small, almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, processes threats and triggers your fight or flight response. When you hear a rustle in the bushes, when you catch movement in your peripheral vision, when you smell something unfamiliar, your amygdala fires. Adrenaline floods your system, your heart rate spikes, your pupils dilate, your muscles tense. You're ready to run or fight, though against most predators, fighting was suicide. This fear, this constant vigilance, is why so many of us still struggle to sleep in the dark, why we wake at the smallest sound, why our ancestors, and by extension us, evolved to be light sleepers. Because the humans who slept too deeply, who didn't wake when danger approached, didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. You are descended from the anxious ones, the ones who startled at shadows, the ones whose nervous systems never fully relaxed. So what was out there in the dark? Let's start with the cats. Not house cats, not even modern lions, though they're close relatives. We're talking about Panthera, Leo, African lions, but also larger, more aggressive species that roam the Paleolithic landscape. And then there were the real nightmares. Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, with canines that could grow up to 18 centimeters long. These weren't just for show. They were designed to pierce flesh, to sever arteries, to deliver killing bites to the throat or underbelly of prey. Saber-toothed cats were ambush predators. They didn't chase you down like modern cheetahs. They waited, patient, silent, hidden in tall grass or behind rocks. And when you wandered too close, they exploded into motion. A leap, a bite, and you were done. Their powerful forelimbs pinned prey down while those massive fangs did their work. You wouldn't have time to scream. Cave lions, Panthera spelaea, were another threat. Larger than modern lions, they hunted in prides and were incredibly effective pack hunters. A single lion could take down a human easily. A pride could take down a mammoth. If your group was unlucky enough to camp near a pride's territory, you'd hear them at night. Low growls. The sound of something large moving through the dark, and you'd know that sleep, real sleep, was impossible. Leopards were perhaps even more terrifying in some ways. They're solitary, stealthy, and incredibly strong for their size. Leopards are known for dragging prey, often animals much heavier than themselves, up into trees to keep it away from scavengers. If a leopard decided you looked like dinner, it would stalk you, patiently, 4 hours. And when it struck, it went for the neck, crushing your windpipe with a bite force strong enough to crack bone. Then there were the hyenas, spotted hyenas, Crocuta crocuta, are often underestimated. People think of them as scavengers, cowardly carrion eaters. But that's wrong. Hyenas are active hunters. They're incredibly intelligent, highly social, and they hunt in packs called clans. A clan of hyenas could number 20, 30, even 50 individuals. They communicate with eerie whooping calls that carry for kilometers, and they don't kill cleanly. Hyenas eat prey alive, starting with the softest parts, the abdomen, the genitals, while the animal is still struggling. If a clan of hyenas found your camp at night, there was little you could do. They're bold, persistent, and unafraid of humans. They'd circle, test your defenses, look for the weakest member, a child, an elderly person, someone injured or sick, and if they found an opening, they'd rush in, grab their target, and drag them into the darkness. By the time the rest of the group reacted, it was over. Wolves were another constant threat. Not the wolves we know today, but their larger Pleistocene ancestors. Canis lupus, the grey wolf, and its relatives hunted in packs, coordinated their attacks, and were capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves. Wolves are endurance hunters. They chase prey for hours, taking turns, wearing it down until it collapses from exhaustion. And humans, despite being decent endurance runners, couldn't outrun a determined wolf pack. But it wasn't just the large predators. Smaller carnivores were dangerous too. African wild dogs, incredibly efficient pack hunters with a success rate of around 80% higher than lions. Jackals, opportunistic and cunning. Even large raptors, eagles capable of carrying off small children or attacking adults if they were desperate or protecting nests. And let's not forget the crocodiles. If your group camped near water, and you often had to because water was essential, crocodiles were a constant danger. Nile crocodiles, Crocodylus niloticus, are ambush predators that can remain motionless for hours, submerged with only their eyes and nostrils above water. They strike with explosive speed, clamping down with a bite force of around 1,600 kilograms per square centimeter. Once they had you, they'd drag you underwater, drown you, and then perform a death roll to tear your body into pieces. Your only real defense against these predators was fire. If your group had mastered fire, and not all early human groups had, you could keep a blaze burning through the night. Fire created a barrier. Most predators, though not all, were wary of flames. The light pushed back the darkness. The smoke and heat created a perimeter, but fire required constant maintenance. It needed fuel, dry wood, grass, animal dung, anything that would burn, and someone had to stay awake to tend it. If the fire went out, the protection vanished. But even with fire, you weren't completely safe. Some predators, especially if they were starving or desperate, would risk the flames. And fire attracted attention. Other human groups, rival clans competing for the same resources, could see your fire from a distance. They might approach, they might be friendly, or they might see you as a threat, as competition and attack. Violence between human groups was common. Resources were scarce. Territory was everything. If another group moved into your area, it meant less food, less water, less chance of survival for your people. Conflicts erupted, ambushes, raids, murders. Archaeological evidence shows that interpersonal violence was a significant cause of death among early humans. Skulls with fractures from blunt force trauma, bones with embedded stone projectile points, bodies buried hastily, sometimes without ceremony, suggesting they were casualties of conflict. So, at night, you huddled close to the fire. If you had one, you listened. Every sound, every snap of a twig, every rustle of grass sent your heart racing. Your amygdala was on high alert, processing threats, real and imagined. Your body was flooded with cortisol, the stress hormone that keeps you awake, vigilant, ready to react. This is why sleep in the Paleolithic was fragmented. You dozed, you woke, you checked your surroundings. You listened for the group's sentry, the person assigned to stay awake and watch. You dozed again. This pattern of broken sleep, of constant low-level anxiety, is still with us. It's why so many people wake multiple times during the night. Why we're sensitive to sounds. Why we feel safer sleeping in groups or with others nearby. We're still, on some level, trying to survive the Paleolithic night. Children were especially vulnerable. They couldn't defend themselves. They didn't understand the need for silence. A crying infant could attract predators from kilometers away. Mothers had to soothe their children quickly, quietly. Some anthropologists believe this is why lullabies evolved, soft, repetitive sounds that calmed infants without drawing attention. But even then, a persistently crying baby put the entire group at risk. In extreme situations, groups may have made impossible decisions to ensure the survival of the many over the one. And let's talk about what it felt like to be hunted. There's a specific kind of terror that comes with being prey. It's not the sharp fear of a sudden shock. It's slow, creeping dread. The feeling of being watched. Of knowing something is out there, circling, waiting for you to make a mistake. Your muscles stay tense for hours. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your senses sharpen to the point of exhaustion. Every shadow looks like a threat. Every sound is a potential attack. Modern humans rarely experience this anymore, at least not in daily life. But our bodies remember. This is why horror movies work. Why being alone in the dark makes us uneasy. Why we jump at unexpected sounds. Our nervous systems are still calibrated for a world where real monsters existed, where the dark wasn't just unsettling, it was lethal. Some nights, someone didn't make it until morning. A person wandered too far from the fire to relieve themselves and never came back. A sentry fell asleep, and by dawn, one member of the group was gone, dragged away in silence. The group would find tracks, blood, maybe scraps of torn hide, and then life continued. Because mourning was a luxury, survival didn't pause for grief. So yes, you survived another night. The fire stayed lit. No predators breached the perimeter. But the cost was exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from never truly resting. And as the sun rises again, you face a grim truth. Tonight, you'll have to do it all over again, and one night, your luck will run out. You made it through the night. The predators didn't get you. The fire stayed lit. But now, as you stand and try to stretch the stiffness from your body, you feel a sharp pain in your ankle. You twisted it yesterday while running from something you didn't stop to identify. It wasn't bad then, just a twinge. But now it's swollen, hot to the touch, and throbbing with every heartbeat. And in the Paleolithic, an injury like this, something so minor you'd barely think about it today, could very easily kill you. Let's talk about what an injury meant 200,000 years ago. There were no doctors, no hospitals, no antibiotics, no painkillers, no ice packs, no crutches. There wasn't even a clear understanding of what caused infections or how the body healed. If you got hurt, you relied on your body's natural defenses and the limited knowledge your group had accumulated through trial, error, and generational observation. And most of the time, that wasn't enough. A twisted ankle might seem trivial. You've probably had one. You rested it, maybe wrapped it, took some anti-inflammatory medication, and within a week or two, you were fine. But in the Paleolithic, rest wasn't an option. Your group was nomadic. You had to keep moving to find food and water. If you couldn't walk, you couldn't contribute. And if you couldn't contribute, you became a burden. Your body tries to heal itself. The moment you injured your ankle, your immune system activated. Blood vessels in the damaged area dilated, increasing blood flow. That's why it's swollen and warm. White blood cells rush to the site to clear away damaged tissue and fight off any potential infection. Pain receptors fired constantly, sending signals to your brain that something was wrong. This pain wasn't punishment, it was information. Your body telling you to protect the injury, to avoid putting weight on it. But you can't avoid it. You have to walk. Every step sends fresh waves of pain shooting up your leg. The swelling gets worse. Small tears in the ligaments and tendons that should be knitting back together keep getting re-injured. What could have healed in days now takes weeks. And during those weeks, you're slower, weaker, more vulnerable. Now let's make it worse. Let's say you cut your foot on a sharp rock. It's a deep cut, bleeding freely. In the modern world, you'd clean it with soap and water, apply antiseptic, maybe get stitches, cover it with a sterile bandage. Done. In the Paleolithic, you had none of that. You might rinse it with water, if water was available, but that water was contaminated. You might pack it with mud or leaves to stop the bleeding, but mud and leaves carry bacteria. You'd wrap it with a scrap of hide, but that hide was filthy, covered in dirt, sweat, and who knows what else. Bacteria entered the wound immediately. Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, Clostridium, these are everywhere in the environment, on your skin, in the soil, in the water. Normally, your skin acts as a barrier, keeping bacteria out. But a cut, even a small one, is an open door. And once bacteria get inside, they start multiplying. Doubling every 20 to 30 minutes under the right conditions. Within hours, millions of bacterial cells are colonizing the wound. Your immune system fights back. White blood cells, specifically neutrophils and macrophages, swarm the area. They engulf bacteria, destroying them through a process called phagocytosis. Your body produces pus, a mixture of dead white blood cells, dead bacteria, and tissue debris. Pus is actually a sign your immune system is working. But if the infection is too severe, if the bacterial load is too high, your immune system gets overwhelmed. The wound becomes hot, red, swollen. Red streaks appear, radiating outward from the cut. That's lymphangitis, inflammation of the lymphatic vessels as your body tries to contain the infection. If those red streaks reach a lymph node, it swells painfully. You develop a fever. Your body raises its core temperature to create a hostile environment for bacteria, but fever also weakens you. You sweat, you shake. You can't eat, you can't sleep. If the infection continues unchecked, it enters your bloodstream. This is sepsis, septicemia, blood poisoning. Bacteria circulate throughout your body, triggering a massive inflammatory response. Your blood pressure drops. Your organs, deprived of adequate blood flow, start to fail. First your kidneys, then your liver. Your heart struggles to keep up. You become confused, delirious. Eventually, you slip into septic shock, and then you die. All of this from a cut on your foot. Something you could fix today with a bandage and a tube of antibiotic ointment. But 200,000 years ago, it was a death sentence, and injuries like this were constant. Hunting, gathering, walking barefoot over rough terrain, everything you did exposed you to cuts, scrapes, punctures, and infections. Broken bones were even worse. Let's say you fall. Maybe you're climbing to reach fruit in a tree, or you're running from a predator and you trip. You land hard, you hear a crack. Your forearm is bent at an unnatural angle. You've broken the radius and ulna, the two bones in your forearm. The pain is immediate, blinding. You can't use your hand, you can't grip tools, you can't hunt, you can't even feed yourself properly. In the modern world, you'd go to an emergency room. A doctor would take x-rays, realign the bones, set them in a cast, and within 6 to 8 weeks, you'd be healed. In the Paleolithic, you had none of that. If you were lucky, someone in your group knew to pull the bones back into alignment and splint them with sticks and hide. But there was no way to hold the bones perfectly still. Every movement, every jostle, disrupted the healing process. Bones heal through a process called ossification. Your body forms a soft callus of cartilage around the break, which gradually hardens into new bone. But this process requires nutrients, calcium, vitamin D, protein. If you're malnourished, which you probably were, healing is slow and incomplete. The bones might set crooked, your arm might heal shorter than it was before, or with limited range of motion. If the break was severe, if the bone shattered or pierced the skin, infection was almost guaranteed, and a bone infection, osteomyelitis, is devastating. The bacteria destroy bone tissue from the inside. The affected limb becomes useless, rotting while you're still alive. Dental problems were another constant source of agony. Your teeth were critical. You needed them to chew tough meat, fibrous roots, and hard seeds. But dental hygiene didn't exist. You never brushed your teeth. You never flossed. Food particles and bacteria formed plaque, a sticky film that hardened into tartar. Tartar buildup caused gum disease, gingivitis, which progressed to periodontitis. Your gums receded, your teeth loosened. Abscesses formed at the roots, pockets of pus that caused throbbing, relentless pain. A dental abscess could kill you. The infection could spread to your jawbone, causing osteomyelitis. It could spread to your sinuses. Worst of all, it could spread to your brain. The veins that drain blood from your teeth and jaw connect to veins that lead directly to your brain. Bacteria traveling through these veins could cause a brain abscess or meningitis, inflammation of the membranes surrounding your brain and spinal cord. Both were fatal. But even if the infection didn't kill you, the pain was unbearable. Imagine a toothache that never stops, that wakes you from sleep, that makes it impossible to eat. You'd try to numb it by chewing on certain plants, if your group knew which ones had analgesic properties. Willow bark, for example, contains salicin, a compound similar to aspirin, but the relief was minimal and temporary. The only real solution was to remove the tooth, and that meant having someone in your group, with no training and no anesthesia, yank it out with their hands or crude stone tools. The pain was excruciating, the bleeding was profuse, and the extraction site often became infected, starting the cycle all over again. Childbirth, which we'll talk about more later, was one of the deadliest events a woman could experience. But even surviving childbirth often left lasting damage. Pelvic fractures, tearing of the perineum, fistulas, abnormal connections between the birth canal and the bladder or rectum, causing chronic leaking of urine or feces. These injuries made infections common and quality of life unbearable. There was no surgical repair. Women just lived with the damage until another complication, often infection, ended their lives. Burns were common too. You lived around fire. you cooked over open flames. Accidents happened. A spark landed on your skin. You reached too close to the coals. You suffered a second or third degree burn. The skin blistered, peeled away, exposing raw flesh underneath. Burns are incredibly prone to infection because the protective barrier of skin is gone. And burns hurt, constantly. The nerve endings in burned tissue send pain signals non-stop. There was no relief, no burn cream, no skin grafts. Just raw, open wounds that attracted flies, that wept fluid, that took months to heal, if they healed at all. Even something as simple as a splinter could be deadly. A thorn embedded under your skin, you couldn't get it out. Your body tried to wall it off, forming a small abscess. The area became red, swollen, painful. If the infection spread, if it reached your bloodstream, you developed sepsis, all from a splinter. Here's the thing, your body is incredibly resilient. The human immune system is a marvel of evolution, capable of fighting off countless threats. But it has limits. Without proper nutrition, without rest, without medical intervention, even your immune system can be overwhelmed. And in the Paleolithic, you were constantly testing those limits. Every day brought new injuries, new infections, new chances for your body to fail. So yes, you have a twisted ankle. It's swollen, it's painful, but you keep walking because stopping means dying. You grit your teeth, you limp, and you hope, desperately, that this injury doesn't become the one that finally takes you down. Because out here, weakness is fatal, and your body is already failing. You're injured, hungry, and exhausted. But now the weather is turning. Dark clouds are gathering on the horizon. The wind is picking up, cold and sharp, and you have no shelter, no walls, no roof, no protection from what's coming. In the Paleolithic, weather wasn't an inconvenience, it was a life or death threat. And your body, already pushed to its limits, is about to face one of the harshest tests of all. Let's start with the cold. Humans are tropical animals. We evolved in Africa, where temperatures are relatively warm year-round. Our bodies are designed to dissipate heat, not conserve it. We lost most of our body hair through evolution, probably to help with sweating and cooling during long-distance running. That adaptation was great for persistence hunting in the heat, but it left us vulnerable to cold, dangerously vulnerable. Your body maintains a core temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius. This is critical. All of your cellular processes, your metabolism, your enzyme function, your neural activity, everything depends on staying within a narrow temperature range. Drop just a few degrees, and things start to go wrong. Drop further, and you die. When the temperature drops, your body tries to compensate. Blood vessels near your skin constrict, a process called vasoconstriction. This reduces blood flow to your extremities, your fingers, toes, ears, nose, and redirects it to your core to protect vital organs. That's why your hands and feet go numb first in the cold. Your body is sacrificing them to keep your heart, lungs, and brain functioning. You start shivering. Shivering is involuntary muscle contractions, rapid and rhythmic, designed to generate heat. Your muscles are doing work, burning calories, producing warmth, but shivering is expensive. It burns through your energy reserves fast. And remember, you're already malnourished. You don't have extra calories to waste. So you shiver until you can't anymore, and then you just get colder. Hypothermia sets in gradually. At first, you feel cold, uncomfortable, but manageable. Then comes the violent shivering. You can't control it. Your teeth chatter so hard they might crack. Your hands are too stiff to grip anything. You fumble with simple tasks. Then, as your core temperature continues to drop, the shivering stops. Not because you're warmer, because your muscles are too cold to function. This is a bad sign. Your brain starts to malfunction. You become confused, disoriented. You make poor decisions. You might even feel warm, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, where hypothermia victims remove their clothing because their brain's temperature regulation system has failed. You wander away from the group, you lie down, you close your eyes, and you don't wake up. Frostbite is another cold weather nightmare. When your extremities get cold enough, the tissue starts to freeze. Ice crystals form inside and between cells, puncturing cell membranes and cutting off blood supply. At first, the affected area goes numb, white, and waxy. You can't feel your fingers or toes. Then, if you somehow manage to warm up, comes the pain. Agonizing. Burning pain as blood flow returns and damaged nerves wake up. The tissue might turn black as it dies, a process called necrosis. Gangrene sets in. The dead tissue rots, and, without amputation, which wasn't really an option in the Paleolithic, the infection spreads and kills you. But let's say you survive the cold night. Morning comes, the sun rises, and now the opposite problem begins. Heat. The same sun that felt like salvation an hour ago is now beating down on you relentlessly. No shade, no trees, just open savanna and sky. Your body, which spent all night trying to stay warm, now has to cool down, and it's just as hard. Humans cool themselves through sweating. We have between 2 and 4 million sweat glands all over our bodies, more than almost any other mammal. When you sweat, moisture evaporates from your skin, taking heat with it. It's an elegant system, but it requires water, a lot of water. On a hot day, you can lose up to 2 liters of sweat per hour, and you've already established that clean water is scarce. As you dehydrate, your ability to sweat decreases. Your body doesn't have enough water to spare. Your core temperature starts to rise. First comes heat exhaustion. You feel dizzy, nauseous, weak. Your skin is hot and dry. Your heart races as it tries to pump blood to cool your body. You might cramp as electrolytes become imbalanced. You need to rest. You need shade. You need water. But none of those things are guaranteed. If heat exhaustion progresses, it becomes heat stroke. Your core temperature climbs above 40 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, proteins in your cells begin to denature, losing their structure and function. Your brain swells. You become confused, aggressive, or unconscious. Seizures are common. Your organs start to fail. Kidneys, liver, heart. Heat stroke has a mortality rate of up to 50%, even with modern medical treatment. In the Paleolithic, it was a death sentence. And we haven't even talked about the sun itself. Ultraviolet radiation. UV rays damage DNA in your skin cells, causing mutations that can lead to cancer over time. But the immediate effect is sunburn. Your skin turns red, hot, painful. Severe sunburn causes blistering, where the top layer of skin separates and fills with fluid. The skin peels away, leaving raw, vulnerable tissue underneath that's prone to infection. You had no sunscreen, no hat, unless you fashioned one from leaves or hide, no understanding that the sun could damage you at a cellular level. You just knew it hurt, and that prolonged exposure made you feel sick. Some groups may have used mud or clay as a primitive sunblock, smearing it on exposed skin, but that was far from effective. Now let's add rain. Tropical storms in the regions where early humans lived were intense, not gentle spring showers. Torrential downpours that turned the ground into mud and flooded low-lying areas in minutes. You had no waterproof clothing, no umbrella. When rain came, you got soaked. Every layer you wore, animal hide, plant fiber, became heavy, waterlogged, useless. Wet clothing doesn't insulate. In fact, it conducts heat away from your body, making you colder. Even in relatively warm weather, being wet can lead to hypothermia. Your body loses heat 25 times faster in water than in air. So you're standing in the rain, shivering, your core temperature dropping, with no way to dry off. Fire, if you had it, might go out. Dry wood is impossible to find. You huddle with the group, everyone soaked, everyone miserable, waiting for the storm to pass. Lightning was another terror. You didn't understand electricity. You didn't know what caused the bright flashes and deafening booms. Some groups probably attributed it to angry gods or spirits. Lightning strikes killed instantly if they hit you directly. But even near misses were dangerous. The electrical discharge could stop your heart or cause severe burns. And if lightning struck a tree near your camp, it could start a fire, which in dry conditions spread rapidly, forcing you to flee. Seasonal changes were brutal. Ice ages occurred periodically throughout human history. Temperatures dropped globally, glaciers advanced, entire regions became uninhabitable. Early humans had to migrate, following game and livable climates. But migration was risky. You entered unfamiliar territory. You didn't know where water sources were. You didn't know which plants were safe. You encountered other groups who saw you as invaders. Even without ice ages, seasonal variation was extreme. Wet seasons brought floods, mosquitoes, and disease. Dry seasons brought drought, famine, and the constant threat of dehydration. There was no predicting it, no weather forecast. You learned patterns over years, passed them down through generations. But climate is unpredictable. One bad year could wipe out your entire group. Wind was a constant irritant. It dried your skin, chapped your lips, made your eyes sting. Dust storms, common in arid regions, were blinding. Fine particles of sand and dirt filled the air, making it hard to breathe. You'd cover your face with your hands or a scrap of hide, but it didn't help much. The dust got into your lungs, causing respiratory infections and chronic coughs. And let's talk about sleeping in these conditions. In the cold, you couldn't sleep. You drift into a light doze, only to wake shivering, your body demanding that you move, that you generate heat. In the heat, sleep was equally impossible. You were too hot, too uncomfortable, too thirsty. Insects swarmed at night, attracted by your body heat and the carbon dioxide you exhaled. Mosquitoes, flies, gnats, they bit constantly, keeping you awake, spreading disease. Your circadian rhythm, your body's internal clock, tried to regulate your sleep-wake cycle. It's controlled by a small region in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which responds to light and darkness. In the modern world, artificial light disrupts this rhythm, but in the Paleolithic, you were perfectly synced with natural light. You woke with the sun. You slept when it set, except when weather made sleep impossible, when storms raged all night, when cold kept you shivering until dawn, when heat left you restless and drenched in sweat. Sleep deprivation compounded everything. When you don't sleep, your cognitive function declines, your memory falters, Your reaction time slows, your immune system weakens, you're more susceptible to infections, injuries, poor decisions, and in the Paleolithic, a poor decision meant death. You positioned yourself near the fire. You closed your eyes and hoped the weather would be merciful, but mercy wasn't guaranteed. Modern humans complain about weather. Too hot, too cold, too humid, but we control our environments. We have heating, air conditioning, insulated homes, weather-appropriate clothing. We check forecasts on our phones and plan accordingly. 200,000 years ago, you were at the mercy of forces you couldn't predict, couldn't control, and often couldn't survive. The weather wasn't just uncomfortable. It was an active, relentless threat trying to kill you every single day. You've survived the elements. Barely. Your body is battered, exhausted, and running on empty. But survival in the Paleolithic wasn't just about fighting nature. It was about navigating something far more complex and sometimes more dangerous. Other humans, your group, the people you depended on for survival, and who depended on you, because in the Stone Age, being alone meant death. But being part of a group came with its own brutal set of rules. Let's start with the most important fact. You couldn't survive on your own. Not for long. A solitary human in the Paleolithic was a dead human. You needed others to hunt large game, to defend against predators, to share knowledge about where food and water could be found. Cooperation wasn't optional. It was the only reason Homo sapiens survived and eventually thrived. But cooperation required something that didn't come naturally at first. Language, as we know it, didn't fully exist yet. Early Homo sapiens 200,000 years ago were developing proto-language, a system of sounds, gestures, and probably some symbolic thinking. But it wasn't like sitting down and having a conversation. It was more basic. Grunts that meant danger, clicks that meant come here, gestures that indicated direction or action. Over thousands of generations, this communication became more sophisticated, but in the beginning, it was crude, limited, and often misunderstood. Miscommunication could be fatal. Imagine trying to coordinate a hunt when you can't clearly express your plan. One person goes left when they should have gone right, the prey escapes, or worse, someone gets injured because the group wasn't synchronized. You couldn't argue your point. You couldn't explain your reasoning. You either understood each other through context and repetition, or you didn't. And when you didn't, people died. Your group was small, probably between 15 and 50 individuals. Any smaller, and you didn't have enough people to hunt effectively or defend against threats. Any larger, and resources became too strained. You couldn't feed that many mouths. This size, what anthropologists call a band, was the sweet spot for survival. But living in such close quarters with the same people every single day created intense social dynamics. Is less than #. 7 hashes greater than. Everyone had a role. The strongest hunters went after large game. The most skilled gatherers knew which plants were edible and where to find them. Elders, those rare individuals who survived into their 40s or 50s, held knowledge. They remembered past migrations, past droughts, past solutions to problems the younger members hadn't faced yet. Children, once they were old enough, helped with gathering, carrying water, tending fire. Everyone contributed. Because if you didn't, the group couldn't afford to keep you. Hierarchy existed, though it wasn't formalized. The best hunters had status. The strongest fighters had influence. Women who bore healthy children were valued. But power was fluid. If you got injured, if you got sick, if you failed repeatedly, your status dropped. And with it, your access to resources. You might get less food during a shortage. You might be given the least desirable sleeping spot, farthest from the fire. In extreme cases, you might be abandoned. Abandonment was a real and terrifying possibility. If the group was struggling, if resources were scarce, if someone became too much of a burden, the group might leave them behind. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. An injured person who couldn't walk slowed everyone down. An elderly person who could no longer contribute consumed resources without providing value. A sick person might be contagious, a threat to everyone's survival. So the group moved on, and the abandoned person, alone and vulnerable, died within days. But even within a functional group, conflict was constant. Disagreements over food distribution, over who got to mate with whom, over territory and strategy. Early humans didn't have formal laws or justice systems. Disputes were settled through physical dominance, social pressure, or violence. If two men wanted the same woman, they fought. If someone stole food, they were beaten or ostracized. There were no trials, no appeals, just immediate, often brutal consequences. Violence within groups was common. Archaeological evidence shows that many early human remains bear signs of interpersonal violence. Fractured skulls from blunt force trauma, healed bone breaks that suggest past fights, embedded stone points that were never removed. These weren't accidents. These were the results of conflicts that turned physical. And in a world without hospitals, even a fist fight could be fatal. A blow to the head could cause internal bleeding, a brain injury, death days later from swelling or infection. Social bonds were everything. You formed alliances. You shared food with people who might share with you later. You groomed each other, picking lice and ticks from hair and skin, not just for hygiene, but as a social ritual that built trust. You learned who you could rely on and who you couldn't. Betrayal was remembered. Grudges lasted. Because in a group of 20 people, you couldn't just avoid someone you didn't like. You saw them every day. You depended on them, and they depended on you. Mating was complicated. Unlike many animals, humans don't have a specific breeding season. We can reproduce year-round. This created competition. Men competed for access to women. Women chose partners based on strength, hunting ability, and status, traits that suggested their offspring would survive. But monogamy, as we understand it, probably wasn't the norm. Relationships were fluid, partnerships formed and dissolved. Children belonged to the group as much as to any individual parent. Pregnancy and childbirth created vulnerability. A pregnant woman couldn't move as quickly. She needed more food. She was a target for predators. And childbirth itself, which we'll explore more deeply later, was incredibly dangerous. If a woman died during childbirth, the group lost not just her, but potentially the infant as well, unless another lactating woman could nurse it. This loss weakened the group. Fewer women meant fewer future children. Fewer children meant the group might not survive a generation. Children were assets, but also liabilities. They couldn't contribute much until they were 5 or 6 years old. Before that, they consumed resources and required constant supervision. Infant mortality was staggering. Roughly half of all children died before age 5 from disease, malnutrition, accidents, or predation. Parents couldn't afford to become too attached. Emotional investment in a child who might not survive was a psychological burden the group couldn't support. Trust was essential but fragile. You trusted your group to watch your back during a hunt, to wake you if predators approached at night, to share food when you were weak. But that trust could be broken. Someone might hoard food. Someone might fail to alert the group to danger because they were asleep or distracted. And once trust was broken, it was nearly impossible to rebuild. The offender might be shunned, excluded from group activities, denied food. Eventually, they'd either leave or be forced out. Leaving the group voluntarily was essentially suicide. But it happened. Maybe someone was ostracized. Maybe they disagreed with the group's decisions. Maybe they were fleeing violence or abuse. They'd strike out on their own, hoping to find another group, hoping to be accepted. But acceptance wasn't guaranteed. Other groups were suspicious of strangers. You might be a spy from a rival group. You might carry disease. You might be dangerous. So they might kill you on sight or drive you away, leaving you to wander alone until exposure, starvation, or predators finished you off. Encounters with other groups were tense. Sometimes groups met peacefully. They traded information, shared resources, and exchanged members to prevent inbreeding. Young women might be traded between groups to form alliances. This wasn't romantic, it was strategic, but often encounters turned violent. Territory was limited, resources were scarce. If another group moved into your area, it meant competition, and competition meant conflict. Raids were common. A group might attack another at night, killing the men, taking the women and children. This wasn't warfare as we think of it, with armies and strategy. It was brutal, opportunistic violence. Quick and bloody, bodies were left where they fell. Survivors, if any, scattered. The victors took what they could and moved on. But even within your own group, you were never truly safe. Social hierarchies shifted. Alliances changed. Someone who was your friend yesterday might be your rival tomorrow. And because you lived in such close proximity, with no privacy, no personal space, no escape from each other, tensions simmered constantly. Arguments erupted, fights broke out, and sometimes someone didn't survive the night. Sleep, once again, was complicated by social dynamics. You slept in a group for warmth and protection, but that meant tolerating snoring, movement, someone's feet in your face, someone else's elbow in your ribs. It meant listening to couples, mating a few feet away, because privacy didn't exist. It meant waking to the sounds of arguments, crying infants, people relieving themselves just outside the sleeping area. Your sleep was constantly interrupted by the proximity of others. Yet paradoxically, sleeping alone was terrifying. Your nervous system, shaped by millions of years of evolution, felt safest in a group. Even today, many people sleep better with a partner or a pet nearby. That's not learned behavior. That's ancient wiring. Being alone in the dark triggers the same fear response your ancestors felt. Because alone, you're vulnerable. Alone, you're prey. So you tolerated the discomfort, you adapted, you learned to sleep lightly, to wake at unusual sounds, to function on fragmented rest. Because the alternative, isolation, was death. Your group was your family, your army, your survival network. And despite the conflict, the violence, the constant tension, you needed them, just as much as they needed you. You're part of a group. You've found your place in the social hierarchy. You contribute, you survive. But now we need to talk about something that shaped every aspect of Paleolithic life and determined whether your genetic line would continue or end with you. Childbirth and childhood. because bringing new life into this world wasn't a joyful miracle. It was one of the deadliest events a woman could experience. And for the children who survived birth, the odds of making it to adulthood were horrifyingly low. Let's start with the numbers. Roughly half of all children born in the Paleolithic died before reaching age 5. 1 in 2. This wasn't unusual. This was normal. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, predation, exposure, these claimed children constantly. And maternal mortality was just as brutal. Estimates suggest that between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 women died during or shortly after childbirth. For context, in the modern developed world, that rate is about 1 in 5,000. The difference is staggering. Pregnancy itself was dangerous. A pregnant woman needed more calories, more nutrients, but food was scarce and unpredictable. Her body prioritized the growing fetus, pulling calcium from her bones, iron from her blood, whatever resources it could find. This left her weak, anemic, her teeth loosening, her bones fragile. She was more susceptible to infections, to injuries, to predation because she couldn't run as fast or fight as effectively. There was no prenatal care, no ultrasounds to check the baby's position, no way to know if something was wrong until labor began. Women didn't know they were carrying twins until the second baby emerged. They didn't know if the baby was breech, feet, or buttocks first instead of head first, until it was too late to do anything about it. They had no concept of gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, or placental abruption. They just knew that sometimes pregnancy made women sick, and sometimes those women died. Labor began without warning. Contractions, the rhythmic tightening of the uterus, started slowly and built in intensity. These contractions are driven by oxytocin, a hormone that signals the uterine muscles to contract and push the baby downward through the birth canal. For a first-time mother, labor could last 12 to 20 hours or longer. For experienced mothers, it might be shorter, but still agonizing. There was no pain relief, no epidural, no gas and air, no medication of any kind, just pain. Wave after wave of it, each contraction stronger than the last. The pain is caused by the stretching and tearing of tissues, the pressure on nerves, the intense muscular effort of the uterus, and it doesn't stop. It builds until the baby is born or the mother dies from exhaustion, hemorrhage, or complications. Women gave birth in whatever position felt most comfortable. Squatting, kneeling, on all fours. Gravity helped. Other women from the group attended, offering support, holding her upright, trying to keep her calm, but they had limited knowledge. They knew to let the process happen naturally. They knew to cut the umbilical cord, probably with a sharp stone, and tie it off with sinew or plant fiber. But beyond that, if something went wrong, there was little they could do. Complications were common. The baby's head might be too large to pass through the pelvis. This is called cephalopelvic disproportion, and it's more common in humans than in other primates because our large brains and narrow pelvises, shaped for upright walking, create a difficult fit. If the baby couldn't pass, labor stalled. The mother pushed for hours, exhausting herself. Eventually, she might die from exhaustion or infection. The baby, deprived of oxygen, died too. Breech births were often fatal. When the baby's feet or buttocks emerge first, there's a high risk of the umbilical cord getting compressed, cutting off oxygen. The baby suffocates before the head is born. Even if the baby survived, the mother often suffered severe tearing because the head, the largest part, came last without the gradual stretching that a normal head-first birth provides. Hemorrhaging was another major killer. After the baby is born, the placenta, the organ that nourished the baby in the womb, must detach and be expelled. Sometimes it doesn't detach completely. Pieces remain inside, causing infection. Or the uterus doesn't contract properly after birth, failing to close the blood vessels where the placenta was attached. Blood pours out. A woman could lose liters of blood in minutes. Without transfusions, without surgical intervention, she bled to death while her newborn cried beside her. Infection was rampant. The birth canal is an open wound after delivery, especially if tearing occurred. Bacteria entered easily. Puerperal fever, also known as childbed fever, was caused by bacterial infections of the uterus and surrounding tissues. The woman developed a high fever. She became delirious. Pus and foul-smelling discharge leaked from her body. Within days, she was dead. And no one understood why. They just knew that some women got sick after giving birth and didn't recover. Even if the mother survived, physical damage was common. The pelvic floor, a network of muscles and tissues that supports the bladder, uterus, and rectum, often tore during childbirth. This could lead to prolapse, where organs drop down into the vaginal canal because the support structures are damaged. Women lived with chronic pain, difficulty walking, and incontinence. Fistulas, abnormal connections between the vagina and bladder or rectum, caused constant leaking of urine or feces. There was no surgical repair. These women suffered in silence, stigmatized, their quality of life destroyed. Now let's talk about the babies who survived birth. They entered a world that was immediately hostile. Newborns are incredibly vulnerable. They can't regulate their body temperature well. They can't feed themselves. They can't move. They're entirely dependent on their mother, and if their mother died during childbirth, their odds of survival dropped to almost zero unless another woman in the group was lactating and willing to nurse them. Breastfeeding was the only option. There was no formula, no bottles, no alternative food source for infants. A baby's survival depended entirely on the mother's ability to produce milk, and milk production requires calories and nutrients that the mother might not have. Malnourished mothers produce less milk. Their babies, underfed, failed to thrive. They didn't gain weight. Their immune systems didn't develop properly. They died from infections, from dehydration, from simple failure to thrive. Infants were also vulnerable to accidents. A mother, exhausted from labor and lack of sleep, might roll over in the night and suffocate her baby. This is called overlaying, and it was common. Or a baby might be placed too close to the fire for warmth and suffer burns, or left unattended for a moment and snatched by a predator. Eagles, large enough to carry off small children, were a real threat. So were hyenas and leopards, drawn to the scent of milk and the vulnerability of an infant. Disease killed constantly. Respiratory infections, diarrheal diseases, parasitic infestations, all of these ravaged children who had no immune defenses. Babies born to mothers who survived certain diseases might receive some passive immunity through breast milk, antibodies passed from mother to child. But that protection was limited. Once weaned, usually around age 2 or 3, children were on their own immunologically, and many didn't make it. Malnutrition stunted growth and development. Children who survived infancy often grew into adults who were shorter, weaker, and less cognitively developed than they could have been with adequate nutrition. Their bones didn't grow properly. Their teeth came in late or not at all. Their brains, which require enormous amounts of energy and nutrients during development, didn't reach full potential. Childhood wasn't a protected time of play and learning. By age 5 or 6, children were expected to contribute. They gathered food, carried water, watched younger siblings, tended the fire. They learned through observation and imitation. There was no formal education, no school. You watched the adults and copied what they did. You learned which plants to gather, which animals to avoid, how to make tools. If you didn't learn, you didn't survive. Accidents were common. Children are curious, impulsive, and lack the judgment to assess danger. They fell from trees, drowned in rivers, got bitten by snakes, burned by fire. They wandered away from the group and got lost or taken by predators. Each loss was a tragedy, but there was no time to dwell. The group moved on. Another child might be born, and the cycle continued. Infant and child mortality shaped human behavior in profound ways. Parents couldn't afford to become too attached early. Emotional investment in a child who might not survive was a psychological burden, so bonding happened gradually. If a baby survived the first year, then the first 5 years, then parents allowed themselves to hope, to invest, to love fully. But early on, there was a protective emotional distance. This also meant that women were pregnant frequently. If half your children die, you need to have many children to ensure some survive. Women might give birth every 2 to 3 years, from their mid-teens until their 40s if they lived that long. Each pregnancy and birth further damaged their bodies. Each child was another gamble, and the toll, both physical and emotional. Communities developed rituals around birth and death. When a child died, the group might bury the body or leave it for scavengers, depending on circumstances. Grief was real, but it had to be managed. Prolonged mourning jeopardized the group's survival. Life demanded forward momentum, so people grieved quickly, quietly, and moved on because they had no other choice. The children who did survive childhood grew into adults who were tough, resilient, and deeply shaped by loss. They'd seen siblings die. They'd seen friends taken by predators or illness. They understood, from a very young age, that life was fragile and death was always close. This wasn't pessimism, it was realism, and it made them careful, vigilant, and fiercely protective of the group that kept them alive. So yes, some children survived, some grew strong, learned the skills they needed, and became adults who contributed to the next generation. But childhood in the Paleolithic wasn't innocent. It was a brutal test. And passing that test meant you were lucky, resilient, and part of a group that valued your survival enough to invest in it. You survived childhood. You made it through the gauntlet of disease, malnutrition, and predation that claimed half your peers. You're an adult now, or at least what passes for one in the Paleolithic. But your body is already breaking down, and there's an entire world of invisible enemies you can't see, can't understand, and can't fight. Diseases, parasites, and microscopic organisms that are slowly, steadily destroying you from the inside out. Let's start with the most basic fact. You are never alone. Not really. Your body is a walking ecosystem, hosting trillions of microorganisms. Some are helpful, like the bacteria in your gut that aid digestion, but many are harmful, and in the Paleolithic, without any understanding of germ theory, without hygiene, without medicine, these microscopic invaders had free rein to multiply, spread, and kill. Parasites were universal. Every single person in your group carried them. Intestinal worms, roundworms, hookworms, whipworms, tapeworms. These weren't occasional infections, they were constant companions. You ingested parasite eggs from contaminated water, from unwashed hands, from raw or undercooked meat. The eggs hatched in your intestines. The larvae burrowed through your intestinal wall, entered your bloodstream, and migrated to various organs. Some traveled to your lungs, where you coughed them up, swallowed them again, and they returned to your intestines to mature and reproduce. Adult worms lived in your gut, feeding on the nutrients you consumed. A heavy worm burden meant you were chronically malnourished, even if you ate regularly. The worms took the calories, the vitamins, the minerals. They left you with scraps. This caused anemia, a condition where you don't have enough red blood cells to carry oxygen effectively. You felt tired, weak, dizzy. Your skin looked pale. Your heart had to work harder to pump oxygen-depleted blood. Over time, this strained your cardiovascular system and shortened your life. Some parasites were even more insidious. Guinea worms, which we mentioned earlier, grew up to 1 meter long inside your body. Liver flukes infected your bile ducts, causing chronic inflammation, abdominal pain, and eventually liver damage. Schistosomes burrowed into your bloodstream through your skin when you waded into water. They lived in your blood vessels, laying eggs that triggered immune responses, scarring your organs. Over years, this led to organ failure. But parasites were just the beginning. Bacterial infections were everywhere. Streptococcus, Staphylococcus E. coli, Salmonella. These bacteria lived on your skin, in your mouth, in your gut. Normally, your immune system kept them in check. But any break in your skin, any cut, scrape, or wound gave them an entry point. And once inside, they multiplied rapidly. Tuberculosis, caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis, was likely common among early humans. TB is spread through airborne droplets. When an infected person coughs or sneezes, you breathe in the bacteria. They settle in your lungs and begin to multiply. Your immune system tries to wall them off, forming granulomas, small clusters of immune cells surrounding the bacteria. But TB is resilient. It can lie dormant for years, then reactivate when your immune system weakens from malnutrition, stress, or another illness. Active TB causes a chronic cough, often with blood-tinged sputum. You lose weight. You sweat profusely at night, drenching whatever you're sleeping on. You develop a low-grade fever that never quite goes away. Over months or years, the bacteria destroy lung tissue. You struggle to breathe. You waste away. And because TB is contagious, you spread it to everyone in your group. Close contact, shared sleeping spaces, lack of ventilation, all of these made TB transmission almost inevitable. Malaria was endemic in many regions where early humans lived, caused by Plasmodium parasites and transmitted by Anopheles mosquitoes. Malaria infected red blood cells. The parasites multiply inside the cells, then burst out, destroying them and releasing toxins into your bloodstream. This triggers cycles of fever and chills. You spike a high fever, sweating and shaking. Then the fever breaks and you feel relatively normal. Then it happens again. Every 2 to 3 days, the cycle repeats. Severe malaria causes anemia because so many red blood cells are destroyed. It can cause cerebral malaria, where infected cells block blood vessels in the brain, leading to seizures, coma, and death. Children and pregnant women were especially vulnerable. Many populations in malaria-endemic regions developed genetic adaptations over thousands of generations. Sickle cell trait, for example, provides some protection against malaria, but that adaptation came at a cost. People with 2 copies of the sickle cell gene developed sickle cell disease, a painful and often fatal condition. Dysentery, both bacterial and amoebic, caused severe diarrhea with blood and mucus. The infection inflamed and ulcerated the lining of your intestines. You lost fluids rapidly, dehydration set in, electrolyte imbalances caused muscle cramps, confusion, and cardiac arrhythmias. Without rehydration therapy, which didn't exist, you died within days. And because dysentery spreads through contaminated water and poor hygiene, once one person got it, others followed. Respiratory infections were constant. Living in close quarters, breathing smoke from fires, being exposed to cold and damp, all of these made you susceptible to pneumonia, bronchitis, and other lung infections. Streptococcus pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenzae, these bacteria infected your airways. Your lungs filled with fluid. You coughed constantly, struggling to breathe. Fever spiked. Your body fought the infection, but without antibiotics, many people didn't survive. Skin infections were ubiquitous. Impetigo, caused by Staphylococcus or Streptococcus, created weeping sores that crusted over. Cellulitis, a deeper skin infection, caused red, swollen, painful areas that spread rapidly. Abscesses formed when bacteria invaded hair follicles or sweat glands, creating pockets of pus. These had to drain on their own or be lanced, a painful process with no anesthesia. If an abscess wasn't drained, the infection could spread to the bloodstream, causing sepsis. Fungal infections thrived in the warm, moist environment of unwashed skin and clothing. Athlete's foot, ringworm, yeast infections. These caused itching, burning, and discomfort. They weren't usually fatal, but they were chronic. You scratched, breaking the skin, creating opportunities for bacterial infections. The cycle continued endlessly. Sexually transmitted infections existed, though their prevalence and types in the Paleolithic are harder to determine. Bacterial infections like chlamydia and gonorrhea cause pelvic inflammatory disease in women, leading to chronic pain, infertility, and sometimes death from sepsis. In men, they cause painful urination and can lead to systemic infections if untreated. These infections spread silently, often without obvious symptoms, until serious damage was done. Your immune system was your only defense, and it was constantly under siege. The immune system works through a complex network of cells, proteins, and signaling molecules that identify and destroy foreign invaders. White blood cells, specifically lymphocytes, produce antibodies that target specific pathogens. Macrophages engulf and digest bacteria. Natural killer cells destroy infected or cancerous cells. This system is remarkably effective, but it has limits. Malnutrition weakened your immune response. Your body needs protein, vitamins, minerals, especially vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, and iron, to produce immune cells and antibodies. When you're starving, your body prioritizes vital functions like keeping your heart beating and your brain functioning. Immune function gets deprioritized, so you become more susceptible to infections. And infections make you weaker, reducing your ability to find food, perpetuating the cycle. Chronic inflammation was another problem. Your immune system responding constantly to parasites, to low-grade infections, to environmental toxins, creates ongoing inflammation. This inflammation damages tissues over time. It contributes to cardiovascular disease, joint problems, and accelerated aging. You felt the effects as chronic pain, stiffness, fatigue. Your body was wearing out decades earlier than it should have. Sleep, or the lack of it, made everything worse. Sleep is when your immune system does much of its repair work. During deep sleep, your body produces cytokines, proteins that help fight infection and inflammation. It ramps up production of T cells, a type of white blood cell critical for immune response. When you don't sleep well, and you rarely did, your immune system doesn't function optimally. You're more vulnerable to every pathogen you encounter. But here's the cruel irony. Infections disrupted sleep. Fever kept you awake. Pain kept you awake. Coughing kept you awake. Itching from parasites and skin infections kept you awake. So you were trapped in a vicious cycle. Lack of sleep weakened your immune system. Weakened immunity led to more infections. More infections disrupted sleep even further, and the cycle spiraled downward. Mental health suffered too, though it wasn't recognized as such. Chronic pain, chronic illness, constant stress, these affected your brain chemistry. Serotonin and dopamine, neurotransmitters that regulate mood, were depleted. You might have felt what we'd now call depression or anxiety. But there was no framework to understand it, no treatment, no support. You just felt bad, tired, hopeless, and you kept going because stopping meant death. Some infections left permanent damage. Polio, a viral infection that attacks the nervous system, could cause paralysis. Survivors lived with withered limbs, unable to walk or use their arms. Leprosy, caused by Mycobacterium leprae, damaged nerves and skin, leading to disfigurement and loss of sensation. These people often couldn't contribute fully to the group's survival. They became dependent, which in a resource-scarce environment meant they might be abandoned. And yet, despite all of this, some people survived. Their immune systems adapted. They developed resistance to local pathogens. They recovered from infections that killed others. This is natural selection in action. The people who survived to reproduce passed on genes that conferred some advantage, stronger immune responses, better ability to metabolize limited nutrients, genetic resistance to certain diseases. Over thousands of generations, humans became more resilient, but that resilience was built on an ocean of death. So you lived with disease, you lived with parasites, you lived with chronic pain and infections that never quite healed. Your body was a battlefield, and you were losing slowly, but you kept going. Because in the Paleolithic, survival wasn't about thriving. It was about lasting one more day. You've survived disease, parasites, and the constant threat of infection. Your body is exhausted, but you're still here. And if you're lucky, very lucky, your group has something that changes everything. Fire. Not every early human community had mastered it yet. Fire making was a skill that developed gradually over tens of thousands of years. But if your group had fire, you had light, warmth, protection, and a way to make food safer. Fire was the difference between barely surviving and actually having a chance. Let's talk about what fire meant. First, the practical. Warmth. We've already established how deadly cold was. Fire allowed you to survive nights that would otherwise kill you. You could huddle close to the flames, feeling heat radiate into your body, raising your core temperature, stopping the shivering that depleted your energy. Fire created a microclimate around your group. Even on freezing nights, The area within a few meters of the fire was survivable. But fire required constant attention. Flames consume fuel, wood, dried grass, animal dung, anything that burns. And fuel had to be gathered constantly. Someone, usually multiple people, spent hours each day collecting combustible material. Dry wood was precious. In wet seasons, finding it was nearly impossible. You'd search for dead branches still attached to trees, protected from ground moisture. You'd strip bark. You'd gather dried dung from herbivores, which burned slowly and produced decent heat. Maintaining fire was a full-time job. If the fire went out, starting it again was difficult. Some groups used friction methods, the bow drill, where you rapidly spin a wooden shaft against a base, generating enough heat through friction to create an ember. This required skill, patience, and dry materials. It could take 30 minutes or longer of continuous effort. The hand drill was similar, but more physically demanding. You'd spin a stick between your palms, pressing down against a flat piece of wood until friction created heat, then smoke, then finally a tiny glowing ember. That ember was precious. You transfer it carefully to a bundle of dry tinder, grass, bark shavings, anything that ignites easily. You'd blow on it gently, feeding it oxygen, watching smoke turn into flame. One mistake, one gust of wind, one moment of carelessness, and the ember died. You'd have to start over. So groups guarded their fires obsessively. Someone always tended it, adding fuel, repositioning logs, making sure it never went out. Some groups didn't know how to make fire. They relied on natural sources. Lightning strikes occasionally ignited trees or grasslands. If you saw smoke, you ran toward it. You grabbed burning branches, carefully transporting them back to your camp, nursing those flames, keeping them alive. Losing fire meant waiting, hoping for another lightning strike, another chance. In the meantime, you lived in darkness and cold. Fire provided light. This seems obvious, but consider what it meant psychologically. Nighttime in the Paleolithic was absolute darkness. No streetlights, no moon bright enough to see clearly, just blackness. Your eyes adapted somewhat. The pupils dilated, allowing more light in. Rod cells in your retina, which detect light and motion, but not color, became more active. But human night vision is terrible compared to most nocturnal predators. Fire changed that. With fire, you could see. Not far, maybe 10 or 15 meters depending on the size of the blaze, but enough. Enough to see movement in the darkness, enough to know if something was approaching. Predators, most of them, were wary of fire. The light confused them. The smoke irritated their eyes and noses. The heat created a barrier. Lions, hyenas, leopards, they'd circle the camp, staying just outside the firelight, watching, but they rarely entered. Fire brought you safety, at least for the night. But fire wasn't foolproof. Desperate predators, starving or bold, sometimes ignored the flames, and fire attracted attention. Other human groups saw your fire from kilometers away. They knew where you were. If they were friendly, that was good. If they were hostile, you'd just announced your location to enemies who might wait until your fire died down, then attack. Fire also transformed food. Cooking is one of the most significant innovations in human history. Raw meat is tough, difficult to chew, harder to digest. Cooking breaks down proteins and fibers, making them softer and easier for your stomach to process. This means you extract more calories and nutrients from the same amount of food. Cooked food essentially gave early humans access to more energy, which fueled larger brains and more complex social behaviors. Heat also kills pathogens. Bacteria, parasites, viruses. Most of them can't survive high temperatures. Cooking meat to an internal temperature above 70 degrees Celsius destroys most harmful organisms. This reduced the incidence of foodborne illnesses. You still got sick because water was contaminated and hygiene was non-existent, but cooked food was significantly safer than raw. Roasting meat over an open flame was the simplest method. You'd skewer chunks on sticks and hold them over the fire, turning them to cook evenly. Fat dripped into the flames, causing flare-ups. You'd pull the meat back, wait, try again. It was imprecise. Sometimes the outside was charred while the inside was raw. Sometimes it fell into the fire and you had to fish it out, covered in ash. But it was better than nothing. Some groups learned to cook in embers. You'd bury food wrapped in leaves or covered in clay, in the hot coals. The indirect heat cooked it slowly, more evenly. Root vegetables, tubers, small animals, these worked well with this method, but it required patience and fuel, both of which were often in short supply. Fire also allowed you to process certain foods that were otherwise inedible. Some plants contain toxins that break down when heated. Cassava, for example, contains cyanogenic glycosides that release cyanide when eaten raw. Cooking neutralizes these compounds. Early humans may have discovered this through trial and error, watching which foods made them sick and experimenting with heat. But fire was dangerous. Burns were common. You reached too close, a log shifted, sending sparks onto your skin. A child playing near the fire touched a hot stone. Second and third degree burns were agonizing and often fatal due to infection. The skin, your body's protective barrier, was destroyed. Fluid leaked from the wound. Bacteria entered easily. You developed fever, sepsis, organ failure. Smoke inhalation was another chronic problem. Sitting close to fire meant breathing smoke constantly. Your lungs, designed to extract oxygen from clean air, struggled with particulate matter. Soot accumulated in your airways. You developed chronic bronchitis, a persistent cough that produced black or grey mucus. Over years, this damaged lung tissue, reducing your ability to breathe efficiently. Respiratory infections became more frequent and more severe. Fires also posed a risk of spreading. One strong gust of wind could send embers into dry grass or nearby vegetation. Wildfires started quickly and spread faster than you could run, especially if you were burdened with children or supplies. Groups learned to clear the area around their fires, creating fire breaks, but accidents still happened. People died, trapped by flames or from smoke inhalation as they tried to escape. Fire also required strategic decisions. Do you keep a large fire for maximum warmth and protection, burning through fuel rapidly, or a small fire that conserves resources but provides less heat and light? In cold regions, during harsh winters, groups sometimes face the choice between freezing or depleting their fuel reserves too quickly. If you ran out of fuel before winter ended, you died. Psychologically, fire was transformative. It created a gathering space. Your group sat in a circle around the flames. You shared food. You communicated, pointing, gesturing, making sounds that eventually evolved into language. Fire extended your productive hours. You could work on tools, process hides, tell stories through gestures and expressions after dark. Some anthropologists believe that sitting around fires, staring into flames, may have contributed to the development of human imagination and abstract thinking. Staring at fire is mesmerizing. The flickering light, the dancing shadows, the crackling sounds, these engage your senses in a way that's almost meditative. Modern humans still feel this pull. Campfires, fireplaces, candles, we're drawn to flames. It's hardwired. For hundreds of thousands of years, fire meant survival. Our brains associate it with safety, warmth, and community. But fire also disrupted sleep. Bright light, even firelight, affects your circadian rhythm. Your brain uses light cues to regulate sleep-wake cycles. When the sun sets, darkness signals your pineal gland to release melatonin, a hormone that makes you feel sleepy. But firelight, especially if it's bright, delays this process. You stayed awake longer, sitting by the fire, because your brain thought it was still daylight. This wasn't necessarily bad. Extended waking hours allowed for social bonding, tool making, and planning. But it also meant you slept less, and combined with the other factors we've discussed, cold, hunger, predators, parasites, this further reduced the quality and quantity of your rest. You were chronically sleep deprived, running on fumes, your body and mind operating below optimal capacity. Still, fire was worth it. The trade-offs, the burns, the smoke, the constant need for fuel, these were prices worth paying for the protection and advantages fire provided. Groups with fire had higher survival rates. They could live in colder climates, they could defend themselves better, they could eat more safely. Fire was a game changer, a technology that separated humans from every other species and set us on the path towards civilization. So if your group had fire, you were fortunate. You tended it carefully, kept it alive, and thanked whatever forces you believed in for that flickering light in the darkness. Because without it, the Paleolithic night was far more terrifying, and survival was just that much harder. You have fire. If you're lucky, you have your group. You've survived this long through sheer resilience and chance. But now something's wrong. Your stomach hurts. Your head is pounding. You're burning with fever. You need help. You need medicine. You need a healer. But in the Paleolithic, medical knowledge was essentially non-existent. There were no doctors, no hospitals, no understanding of what was actually happening inside your body. There was only hope, ritual, and the slim possibility that your body could heal itself. Let's be clear about what medicine looked like 200,000 years ago. It didn't, not in any form we'd recognize. The concept of disease as we understand it, caused by microorganisms, genetic factors, or environmental toxins, was completely unknown. Instead, illness was mysterious, frightening, often attributed to spiritual forces, angry gods, or curses from rival groups. You got sick because something supernatural was displeased, and the solution was equally supernatural. Some groups had individuals who filled the role of healer or shaman. These weren't trained medical professionals. They were people, often elders, who'd accumulated knowledge through observation and experience. They'd seen someone with a particular symptom improve after eating a certain plant. They'd noticed that infections sometimes drained on their own. They'd watched patterns and tried to replicate successes, but their understanding was limited, often wrong, and mixed with ritual and superstition. If you were sick, the shaman might examine you, not with tools or tests, but by looking, touching, smelling. They'd feel your forehead to gauge fever. They'd look at your tongue, your eyes, your skin for signs of jaundice, pallor, or rashes. They'd smell your breath or your wounds for the sweet or rotten odors that indicated infection. But they had no framework for interpreting these signs scientifically. They just knew that certain signs often preceded death. Treatment might involve herbal remedies. Some plants genuinely have medicinal properties. Willow bark, as mentioned earlier, contains salicin, which reduces pain and inflammation. It's the precursor to modern aspirin. Other plants have antimicrobial, antifungal, or antiparasitic compounds. Garlic, for example, has allicin, which has mild antibacterial effects. Certain tree resins have antiseptic properties. Early humans, through generations of trial and error, identified some of these. But finding and using these plants was hit or miss. The shaman might prepare a poultice, crushing leaves or roots into a paste and applying it to wounds or swollen areas. They might brew a tea from bark or flowers and have you drink it. Sometimes it helped. Often it did nothing. Occasionally it made things worse if the plant was toxic or if you were allergic. There was no dosage control, no standardization, no way to know what was actually effective versus what was placebo. The placebo effect is real. If you believe a treatment will help, your brain can trigger physiological responses that improve symptoms, reduce stress, lower blood pressure. Even enhanced immune function can result from belief alone. So if the shaman gave you something and told you it would heal you, and you believed them, you might actually feel better. Not because the treatment worked, but because your mind influenced your body's response. But belief only goes so far. If you had a bacterial infection, a parasitic infestation, or internal injuries, no amount of positive thinking would save you. Your body either fought off the threat on its own, or you died. The shaman might perform rituals, chanting, dancing, making symbolic gestures. These served social and psychological functions, providing comfort and structure during frightening times. But they had no medical efficacy. Let's talk about what happened when you broke a bone. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth expanding. A broken bone requires immobilization to heal properly. The shaman might recognize this. They'd try to set the bone, pulling it back into alignment, which was excruciating without anesthesia. Then they'd splint it using sticks, bones, or stiff bark, wrapping it with plant fibers or strips of hide to hold it in place. If the splint was done well and you were lucky, the bone might heal. But healing requires weeks of immobility. You couldn't hunt, you couldn't gather. You became dependent on the group, and if the break was severe, if bones splintered or pierced skin, infection was almost guaranteed. The shaman had no antibiotics. They might try to clean the wound with water, but remember, water was contaminated. They might apply plant poultices, but bacteria thrived in warm, moist environments. More often than not, compound fractures resulted in gangrene, sepsis, and death. Amputations may have been attempted in extreme cases. Archaeological evidence suggests that some ancient humans survived the removal of limbs indicated by healed bone stumps. But performing an amputation with stone tools, no anesthesia, and no way to control bleeding or prevent infection was a desperate measure. You'd be held down by several people while the shaman used a sharp stone blade to cut through flesh, then scraped or broke through bone. The pain was unimaginable. Blood loss was massive. Most people didn't survive the procedure. Those who did faced lifelong disability in a world that didn't accommodate the disabled. Dental problems were treated with extraction, as we've mentioned. The shaman would grip the offending tooth, often with their fingers or crude pincers made from bone or wood, and yank the tooth might come out cleanly. Or it might break, leaving roots embedded in your jaw. Those roots would abscess, creating new infections. The extraction site bled heavily. You'd bite down on moss or cloth to stem the flow, and then you'd hope infection didn't set in. Bloodletting. The practice of intentionally removing blood to treat illness may have been practiced by some groups. The logic, flawed but persistent across many ancient cultures, was that removing bad blood helped the body heal. The shaman would make a cut, often on the arm or leg, and let blood drain into a container or onto the ground. Or they'd use leeches, which attach to skin and feed on blood. The problem is that bloodletting weakens you. It reduces your blood volume, lowers your oxygen carrying capacity, and leaves you more vulnerable to shock and infection. Leeches, ironically, do have some medical value. Their saliva contains anticoagulants that prevent blood from clotting and substances that reduce inflammation. Modern medicine still uses leeches in specific surgical procedures, but in the Paleolithic, their use was based on superstition, not science. And the blood loss they caused often did more harm than good. Fever was terrifying because it was poorly understood. Your body raises its temperature to create an inhospitable environment for pathogens. Fever is actually a sign your immune system is working, but to early humans, it seemed like your body was burning from the inside. The shaman might try to cool you with water, if available, or move you into shade. They might encourage you to drink, but high fevers, above 40 degrees Celsius, cause delirium, seizures, and brain damage. There was nothing they could do except watch and wait. Pain management was primitive. Severe pain from injuries, infections, or chronic conditions was endured. You might chew on certain plants with mild analgesic properties. Opium, poppies, cannabis, and other psychoactive plants existed, but whether early Homo sapiens used them is unclear. Some groups may have discovered that certain plants altered consciousness, providing temporary relief or distraction from pain, but these weren't standardized medicines. They were experiments, sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful. Childbirth complications were largely beyond the shaman's ability to address. If labor stalled, if the baby was breech, if hemorrhaging occurred, there was little to be done. The shaman might try to manually reposition the baby, reaching inside the birth canal, which was agonizing and risked infection. They might try to stop bleeding by packing the wound with moss or cloth. But without surgical intervention or blood transfusions, most complications were fatal. Mental health issues, depression, anxiety, trauma, were not understood as medical conditions. If someone was behaving strangely, withdrawn, or erratic, it might be attributed to spirit possession or curses. The shaman might perform exorcism rituals, trying to drive out the malevolent force. These rituals involved chanting, sometimes physical restraint, sometimes isolation. None of this addressed the underlying neurochemical or psychological issues. The person either recovered on their own through the brain's natural healing processes, or they didn't. Sleep disturbances, which were universal given the conditions, were also not recognized as treatable. Insomnia, nightmares, fragmented sleep, these were just part of life. No one connected poor sleep with weakened immunity, impaired cognition, or increased mortality. You slept when you could. You woke when threats demanded it, and you carried the exhaustion with you every day. The human body has remarkable self-healing abilities. Your immune system fights infections. Your bones knit back together. Your skin regenerates. given time, proper nutrition, and rest, your body can recover from many injuries and illnesses. But in the Paleolithic, those conditions, time, nutrition, rest, were rarely met. You were constantly stressed, malnourished, and deprived of quality sleep. Your body was always playing catch-up, trying to heal while new threats emerged. So when you got sick or injured, you relied on hope. Hope that your body was strong enough. Hope that the shaman's treatments wouldn't make things worse. Hope that the group wouldn't abandon you if recovery took too long. Because in the absence of real medicine, hope was the only treatment anyone had, and far too often it wasn't enough. We've spent so much time talking about everything that was trying to kill you, and there's been a lot: the predators, the parasites, the starvation, the cold. But here's something worth considering. Despite all of it, some humans not only survived but actually developed skills that we've almost completely lost. Skills that allowed them to read the world in ways we can barely imagine today. Because while Paleolithic life was brutal, the humans who lived it weren't helpless. They were remarkably capable, astonishingly tough, and in many ways far more competent than most of us could ever hope to be. Let's start with tracking. Modern humans navigate with GPS, maps, and street signs. Early humans navigated by reading the landscape like a book. They could look at a footprint in the dirt and tell you what animal made it, how large it was, how long ago it passed, whether it was injured, and which direction it was heading. This wasn't guesswork. It was precise observation honed over years of practice. A footprint reveals weight distribution. Deeper impressions at the front mean the animal was running. Even depth suggests walking. The spacing between prints indicates speed. The sharpness of the edges tells you how fresh the track is. Wind and weather erode prints over time. Sharp edges mean recent, within hours. Softened edges mean older, maybe a day or more. Early humans processed all of this information instantly, unconsciously, the way you read text on a page. But tracking went beyond footprints. Broken twigs at a certain height indicated an animal brushing past. Disturbed leaves showed where something bedded down for the night. Scat, animal droppings, told you what the animal ate, how recently, and its general health. Fresh scat is moist and odorous. Old scat dries out, loses smell, crumbles. Different animals have distinctive scat shapes and contents. Herbivores leave fibrous pellets or piles. Carnivores leave darker, more pungent droppings, often containing fur or bone fragments. Early humans could follow a trail for kilometers, sometimes over multiple days, piecing together a narrative from subtle clues. They knew animal behavior intimately. They knew where certain species went to drink, where they grazed, where they sought shade during the hottest part of the day. This knowledge wasn't learned from books. It was accumulated through direct observation, passed down through generations, and constantly tested against reality. Their senses were sharper than ours in practical ways, not because their biology was fundamentally different, but because they used their senses constantly for survival. Hearing was attuned to relevant sounds. The snap of a twig meant possible danger or possible prey. The rustle of grass indicated wind direction and intensity, which mattered for hunting and for predicting weather. Bird calls conveyed information. Alarm calls meant a predator was nearby. Foraging calls meant relative safety. Vision was adapted to spot movement and patterns. Early humans could detect the flick of an ear, the twitch of a tail, the shift of a shadow that indicated an animal hiding in vegetation. They noticed changes in the landscape, A path that was there yesterday but disturbed today meant something large had passed through. They saw tracks where most of us would see only dirt. Smell was more functional too. You could smell water from a distance, especially if it was stagnant. The earthy, mineral scent of moisture carried on the wind. You could smell smoke from fires, which indicated other humans, possibly friendly, possibly hostile. You could smell death, the sweet, sickly odor of decay, which meant either a predator's kill to scavenge or a dangerous area where predators were feeding. Their physical endurance was extraordinary. Modern humans, even athletes, rarely push their bodies the way early humans did daily. You walked, on average, 15 to 20 kilometers per day. Some days more. Persistence hunting, which we discussed earlier, required running or jogging 10 to 15 kilometers or more in pursuit of prey. Your body adapted to this constant activity. Muscles became lean and efficient, not bulky like bodybuilders, but functional. Your legs were strong from walking on uneven terrain. Your core was stable from carrying loads, children, firewood, tools, food, water. Your feet, walking barefoot constantly, developed thick calluses that protected against rocks, thorns, and heat. The arches of your feet, designed for shock absorption, were strong and flexible. Cardiovascular fitness was exceptional. Your heart and lungs worked efficiently because they had to. Oxygen delivery to muscles, removal of metabolic waste like lactic acid, temperature regulation through sweating. All of these systems were finely tuned through constant use. You could maintain a moderate pace for hours without stopping, something most modern humans struggle to do even for 30 minutes. But this endurance came at a cost. Your joints, especially knees, hips, and ankles, wore down over time. Cartilage, the smooth tissue that cushions bones at joints, degraded from constant impact. By your 30s, you likely had some degree of arthritis, inflammation of the joints causing pain and stiffness. You kept moving because you had to, but every step hurt. Tool making was another skill we've largely lost. Early humans created tools from stone, wood, bone, and plant fibers. Knapping, the process of shaping stone by striking it with another stone or a piece of bone, requires understanding fracture mechanics. You need to know where to strike, how hard, at what angle, to remove flakes and create a sharp edge. This isn't random, it's precise. Learned through apprenticeship and practice. A well-made stone tool, a hand axe or a blade, could cut through hide, butcher meat, scrape skins, and serve as a weapon. These tools were valuable. You carried them with you, resharpened them when edges dulled, and only discarded them when they were too small or broken to be useful. Losing your tools could mean the difference between eating and starving, between defending yourself and being defenseless. Fire making, as we've discussed, was labor-intensive and required skill, but once mastered, it was repeatable. You understood the materials needed, you knew the technique, you could create fire in various conditions, though not all. Wet weather made it nearly impossible, but in dry conditions, you could generate fire in under an hour with the right tools and materials. Plant knowledge was encyclopedic. Early humans knew hundreds of plant species by sight, smell, and taste. They knew which were edible, which were medicinal, which were toxic. They knew seasonal availability. They knew where certain plants grew, in valleys, near water, on hillsides. This knowledge was survival. A mistake, eating the wrong berry, chewing the wrong root, could kill you or make you violently ill. Weather prediction was also a developed skill. Early humans couldn't forecast with scientific precision, but they noticed patterns, cloud formations, wind direction, animal behavior, all provided clues. Certain birds flying low meant rain was coming. Shifts in wind from warm to cold signaled a storm. Red skies at dawn or dusk indicated specific weather patterns. They were wrong sometimes, but right often enough to plan migrations, seek shelter, or prepare for harsh conditions. Social intelligence was perhaps the most critical skill. Reading people, understanding intentions, building alliances, managing conflicts without violence when possible. These required emotional intelligence. You needed to know who to trust, who to avoid, how to negotiate for resources, how to maintain your status without alienating the group. This was constant social navigation, exhausting in its own way, but essential for survival. Communication, though limited compared to modern language, was effective. You conveyed complex ideas through gestures, facial expressions, tone, and context. You pointed, you mimed actions, you used sounds to indicate urgency or calm. Over time, proto-language developed simple words or phrases associated with specific meanings. This wasn't poetry or philosophy. It was functional. Danger, food, water, come, go, stop. Memory was also extraordinary. Without writing, everything had to be remembered. Migration routes, water sources, landmarks, the locations of useful plants, the habits of animals, stories and knowledge from elders, all stored in the brain, your hippocampus. The brain region involved in memory formation was constantly encoding and retrieving information critical to survival. But memory is imperfect. Details fade, misinformation spreads. Without written records to verify facts, oral traditions could drift over generations. Still, the core knowledge, the essential survival information, was preserved and passed down because forgetting meant death. Resilience, both physical and psychological, was the ultimate skill. You endured pain, hunger, loss, fear, and exhaustion daily. You didn't have the luxury of breaking down. There were no mental health days, no timeouts, no safe spaces. You processed trauma on the move, in real time, while still functioning. This created a kind of toughness that's almost incomprehensible to modern humans living in relative comfort and safety. So yes, Paleolithic life was brutal, but the humans who lived it weren't victims. They were survivors. They developed skills, knowledge, and physical capabilities that allowed them to thrive in conditions that would kill most of us within days. They were our ancestors. And their resilience, their adaptability, their refusal to quit, even when everything was stacked against them, that's why we're here today. They earned our existence through sheer, stubborn survival. So we've walked through it, every painful, exhausting, terrifying step of what life was like 200,000 years ago. The hunger, the cold, the predators, the parasites, the injuries, the diseases, the constant, relentless pressure just to survive one more day. And here's the question that matters. How did anyone make it? How did our ancestors not just survive, but eventually thrive, spread across the entire planet, and build the foundation for everything that came after? The answer is evolution. Not the slow, abstract process you learned about in school, but evolution as a brutal filter, testing every generation, keeping only those with the traits that worked and eliminating everything else. Every person alive today is descended from the ones who made it. the ones who were fast enough, smart enough, tough enough, and lucky enough to survive long enough to reproduce. We are the success story, built on an unimaginable mountain of failure and death. Let's talk about what gave our ancestors an edge. First, brain size. Early Homo sapiens had brains nearly identical in size to ours, roughly 1300 to 1400 cubic centimeters. This was significantly larger than earlier hominins. A larger brain meant more processing power, better problem solving, enhanced memory, the ability to plan ahead, to imagine scenarios that hadn't happened yet, and to learn from past mistakes without repeating them fatally. But bigger brains came with costs. Brain tissue is metabolically expensive. Your brain, which makes up about 2% of your body weight, consumes roughly 20% of your total energy. In a world where calories were scarce, this was a massive investment. The only way it paid off was if that intelligence provided advantages that outweighed the cost. And it did. Smart humans could outsmart prey, avoid predators, find food more efficiently, and cooperate in ways that multiplied their effectiveness. Language, or proto-language, was developing. We've touched on this, but it's worth emphasizing. The ability to communicate complex ideas, even in rudimentary forms, changed everything. You could warn others about dangers they hadn't seen. You could share knowledge about where food was located. You could coordinate hunts, plan migrations, and pass down survival strategies. Groups that communicated better survived at higher rates than those that didn't. Social cooperation was another critical advantage. Humans are not physically impressive compared to many animals. We're not the fastest, strongest, or best armed, but we cooperate at a level almost no other species can match. Early humans hunted in coordinated groups, shared food, defended each other, and cared for the sick and injured when resources allowed. This cooperative behavior is encoded in our psychology. We feel empathy. We form bonds. We experience guilt when we betray trust and gratitude when others help us. These emotions aren't weakness, they're survival mechanisms. Tool use separated humans from almost every other species. Yes, some animals use tools. Chimpanzees use sticks to extract termites. Crows use objects to retrieve food. But humans took it to another level. We created tools to make other tools. We innovated. We improved designs over generations. A stone hand axe from 200,000 years ago is more sophisticated than one from 500,000 years ago. This cumulative culture, building on previous knowledge, accelerated our development. Fire, as we've discussed extensively, was transformative. Groups that mastered fire could live in colder climates, expanding their range. They could cook food, extracting more calories and reducing disease. They could defend against predators. Fire was technology. And technology, even primitive technology, multiplied human capability exponentially. Endurance was another key trait. Humans are persistence hunters. We can run longer distances than almost any other mammal. Our ability to sweat, to cool ourselves efficiently, gave us an advantage in hot climates. We could chase prey until it overheated and collapsed. This wasn't brute strength, it was biological efficiency combined with strategic thinking. Adaptability was perhaps the most important trait. Humans didn't specialize in one environment, we adapted to many: forests, grasslands, coastlines, mountains, deserts. We learned to survive in all of them. This required flexible thinking, the ability to experiment, to try new strategies, to learn from the environment. Species that specialized, that relied on one food source or one type of habitat, went extinct when conditions changed. Humans adapted and survived. Migration was both a necessity and an opportunity. Around 70,000 years ago, some populations of Homo sapiens began leaving Africa. This wasn't a single journey. It was waves of movement over tens of thousands of years. They followed coastlines, river valleys, and game herds. They crossed deserts, mountains, and eventually land bridges exposed during ice ages when sea levels dropped. Why leave? Maybe population pressure, maybe climate change making certain areas uninhabitable, maybe curiosity, the human drive to see what's beyond the next hill. Whatever the reason, those who left faced unimaginable challenges: new predators, unfamiliar plants, extreme climates they'd never experienced. Many groups didn't survive, but some did, and those survivors carried genes that allowed them to handle cold, to digest different foods, to resist new diseases. Genetic mutations provided advantages. Populations that moved to northern latitudes developed lighter skin, an adaptation that allowed better vitamin D synthesis in areas with less sunlight. Groups that relied on milk from domesticated animals much later developed lactose tolerance. Those living at high altitudes evolved better oxygen utilization. Evolution didn't stop. It continued, fine-tuning populations to their environments. But survival wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Humans developed the capacity for hope, for meaning-making, for art, music, and ritual. Cave paintings from 30,000 years ago show that our ancestors didn't just survive, they created. They imagined, they told stories. This wasn't frivolous, it was essential. Stories transmitted knowledge, rituals built group cohesion, art expressed identity. These cultural innovations were survival tools just as much as stone blades. The development of agriculture around 10,000 years ago changed everything again. Nomadic hunter-gatherers became settled farmers. This wasn't universally better. Early farmers often had worse health than hunter-gatherers. Diets became less diverse. Diseases spread more easily in dense settlements, but agriculture supported larger populations. More people meant more innovation, more specialization, more complex societies. And here we are, the descendants of people who survived impossible odds, every challenge we've discussed, the predators, the starvation, the disease, the elements. Your ancestors faced all of it and won. Not because they were superhuman, because they were resilient, adaptable, and cooperative. They didn't give up. Even when everything seemed hopeless, they kept going. So tonight, as you lie in your warm bed, in your climate-controlled room, with clean water a few steps away and food in your refrigerator, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. You're not worried about predators. You're not wondering if you'll eat tomorrow. You're not shivering through the night or fighting off parasites. The struggles you face, the stress, the anxiety, the insomnia, these are real, but they're different. Your nervous system, though, doesn't always know that. The part of your brain that kept your ancestors alive, the amygdala, the fight or flight response, it's still there, still active. It treats a work deadline like a predator. It treats social rejection like exile from the group. It treats uncertainty like starvation. This is why you wake at 3 a.m. with your heart racing, why you can't shut off your thoughts, why sleep feels elusive. Your brain is still trying to protect you from threats that no longer exist, at least not in the same form. Understanding this can help. When you feel anxious, when sleep won't come, remind yourself that you're safe, that your body is responding to ancient programming designed for a different world. Breathe. Slow your heart rate. Signal to your nervous system that the danger has passed, because it has. You survived, not just today, but across 200,000 years of evolutionary history. The humans who lived in the Paleolithic didn't have the luxury of comfort, but they had something we sometimes forget. They had each other, they had purpose, they had the knowledge that every day they survived was a victory, and they passed that survival on to us. We carry their resilience in our DNA, their adaptability in our minds, their refusal to quit in our spirits is less than #0. 7# is greater than. So as you drift off tonight, think about them. The ones who walked through fire and ice, who faced down predators and starvation, who lost children, partners, friends, and still kept going, who looked at an impossible world and decided to survive anyway. You're here because they didn't give up. And maybe that knowledge, that connection to an unbroken chain of survivors stretching back 200,000 years, can bring you some peace. Sleep well. You've earned it. They made sure of that. So here we are. We've traveled 200,000 years back in time, walked in the footsteps of our earliest ancestors, and experienced what life was really like when survival wasn't guaranteed, when every sunrise was a small miracle, and every sunset brought the terror of darkness and predators circling just beyond the firelight. We've seen the hunger, the cold, the disease, the violence. We've felt the weight of a world that offered no second chances and no safety nets. And now, sitting here in the present, the question isn't just how anyone survived back then. The question is, what does all of this mean for you, right now, as you're trying to fall asleep? Everything we've talked about tonight, every struggle, every adaptation, every desperate fight for survival, it's written into your biology. Your body remembers, not consciously, but at a cellular level. The stress response that kept your ancestors alive when a predator approached is the same response that floods your system when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning, worrying about tomorrow. The hypervigilance that made early humans light sleepers, ready to wake at the snap of a twig, is why you startle awake at the smallest sound, why your brain refuses to fully shut down, why true deep sleep feels so elusive. Your amygdala, that ancient alarm system buried deep in your brain, can't tell the difference between a saber-toothed cat and an overdue bill. Both trigger the same cascade of stress hormones. Cortisol floods your bloodstream, your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your breathing becomes shallow. This is the fight or flight response, and it's been keeping humans alive for hundreds of thousands of years. But in the modern world, where threats are abstract and chronic rather than immediate and physical, this response becomes maladaptive. It keeps you awake. It disrupts your sleep architecture. It prevents your body from entering the restorative stages of deep sleep where healing happens. Let's revisit what we know about sleep from an evolutionary perspective. Early humans didn't sleep in long, uninterrupted 8-hour blocks. They slept in shifts, in fragments, always with one eye metaphorically open. This polyphasic or segmented sleep pattern kept them alive, but it also meant they never got the deep, restorative sleep we now know is essential for long-term health. Their bodies were constantly in survival mode, running on adrenaline and sheer will, repairing just enough to make it through another day, but never fully recovering. You don't live in that world anymore. The predators are gone. The starvation, at least for most people reading this, is not an immediate threat. The parasites, the infections, the cold, all manageable or eliminated and yet your body doesn't fully believe it. Your nervous system is still calibrated for danger. This is why sleep hygiene matters. Why creating a sense of safety in your sleep environment, darkness, quiet, comfortable temperature, matters so profoundly. You're not just making yourself comfortable, you're signaling to your ancient brain that the threats have passed, that it's safe to let go, to enter the vulnerable state of deep sleep. Think about what happens when you finally do fall asleep. Your brain cycles through stages: light sleep, where you're still somewhat aware of your surroundings; deep sleep, where your body repairs tissues, strengthens your immune system, and consolidates memories; REM sleep, where you dream, where your brain processes emotions and experiences, rehearsing scenarios and integrating information. Each stage is essential. Each stage was shaped by evolutionary pressures. Your ancestors who slept too deeply got eaten. Your ancestors who never slept deeply enough died from exhaustion, weakened immunity, and cognitive decline. You are descended from the ones who found the balance. But modern life disrupts that balance. Artificial light, especially blue light from screens, tricks your brain into thinking it's still daytime. Your pineal gland, which produces melatonin in response to darkness, doesn't get the signal. So you stay awake longer than you should, scrolling, watching, reading, stimulating your brain when it should be winding down. Caffeine, consumed late in the day, blocks adenosine receptors, preventing the buildup of sleep pressure that naturally makes you tired. Stress, chronic and unrelenting, keeps cortisol levels elevated, making it nearly impossible for your body to shift into rest mode. We've created a world that's safer, more comfortable, and infinitely more complex than the Paleolithic. But we've also created a world that's at odds with our biology. Your body still expects certain rhythms. It expects darkness at night. It expects physical exertion during the day. It expects social connection, real face-to-face interaction, not just digital exchanges. It expects periods of rest, true rest, not constant stimulation. When these expectations aren't met, your body protests. And one of the first things to suffer is sleep. So what's the takeaway? What can you actually do with all of this information? First, acknowledge the disconnect. Recognize that your anxiety, your restlessness, your difficulty sleeping, these aren't personal failures. They're mismatches between your ancient biology and your modern environment. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's just doing it in the wrong context. Second, work with your biology, not against it. Create rituals that signal safety. Dim the lights as evening approaches. Lower the temperature in your bedroom. Engage in calming activities that don't involve screens. Read, stretch, breathe deeply. These aren't just relaxation techniques. They're communication with your nervous system, telling it that the day's dangers have passed, that it's time to let go. Third, practice gratitude, not in a superficial way, but deeply. You have survived, not just today, but across an unbroken line of survivors stretching back 200,000 years. Every single one of your ancestors made it long enough to reproduce. They faced predators you'll never see. They endured hunger you'll never feel. They survived diseases that would kill you in days. And they did it without the tools, the knowledge, the comforts you have. You are the product of their resilience. That's not motivational nonsense. That's biological fact. When you can't sleep, when your mind races, when your heart pounds for no apparent reason, remind yourself that you're safe. Say it out loud if you need to. Your conscious mind knows it's true. But your unconscious mind, the part running on ancient software, needs the reminder. 4 counts out. Hold for 4. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode, counteracting the fight or flight response. It's a manual override for a system stuck in the wrong gear. 4th, move your body. Early humans walked 15 to 20 kilometers every day. They climbed, ran, lifted, carried. Your body still expects this. Sedentary modern life leaves you physically understimulated, which paradoxically makes it harder to sleep. Exercise, even moderate exercise like walking, signals to your body that it's been used, that it's earned rest. Just don't do it too close to bedtime. Give yourself a few hours for your core temperature and heart rate to drop. 5th, connect. Humans are social animals. Isolation, even chosen isolation, is interpreted by your brain as danger. When early humans were alone, they were vulnerable. That vulnerability triggered anxiety. You feel it too. Loneliness disrupts sleep. Connection, real connection, even a brief conversation, a hug, a shared moment, calms your nervous system. You're reminded that you're not alone, that you're part of a group, and that the group provides safety. And finally, embrace imperfection. You're not going to sleep perfectly every night. Neither did your ancestors. They slept when they could, woke when they had to, and kept going. Some nights you'll toss and turn. Some nights your brain won't shut off. That's okay. That's human. Don't add anxiety about not sleeping to the list of things keeping you awake. Accept it. Breathe through it. Rest, even if you're not technically asleep, still provides some recovery. So tonight, as you finally close your eyes, remember where you came from. Remember the ones who walked through fire and ice so you could be here. Remember that your restlessness, your vigilance, your difficulty surrendering to sleep, these are ancient gifts that kept your lineage alive. They served you well for 200,000 years. They don't serve you as well now, but they're not your enemy. They're just outdated software running on modern hardware. And with patience, with understanding, with compassion for yourself and your biology, you can find rest. Before you go, do me a favor. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, what time it is, and one thing you're grateful for tonight. It doesn't have to be profound. It can be as simple as a warm bed or clean water, just one thing, because gratitude, genuine gratitude, shifts your brain out of threat mode and into appreciation. And appreciation is incompatible with anxiety. And if you found value in tonight's journey, if learning about your ancestors and your biology helped you understand yourself a little better, consider subscribing. I'm here every week, exploring the science of sleep, the biology of being human, and the ways we can work with our ancient bodies in this modern world. Not because I have all the answers, but because I'm asking the questions alongside you. Now, dim the lights, turn on that fan, get comfortable, and remember, you wouldn't have survived 200,000 years ago. But you don't have to. Your ancestors did that for you. All you have to do tonight is rest, close your eyes, breathe, and let go. You're safe. You've always been safe. And you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Good night.